She had every reason to let him die. He was the monster who burned her village, shattered her world, and left her with nothing but scars and a 4-year-old daughter she raised alone in silence and shadows. And now, on the worst night of the year, rain hammering the windows like fists, lightning splitting the sky, his guards were dragging her from her bed at knife point, ordering her to save him. Mara Thorne stood in that blood-soaked kitchen, staring at the most powerful alpha in the northern lands bleeding out on the stone floor, and she made a choice that would change everything. But it wasn't the healing that cracked the world open. It was 4 words from a 4-year-old girl standing in a doorway in her nightgown, pointing at the king. "My mama has that." Welcome back. If you are new here, I am so glad you found this story tonight, because this one is going to wreck you in the best possible way. Make sure you are comfortable. This is a long one, and you are going to want to stay until the very end. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see where in the world you are watching from. Hit that like button, and let's begin. The storm came without warning. That was the thing about the Ashvale Mountains. They did not give you the courtesy of a forecast. 1 hour the sky was a bruised purple at the edge of the tree line, distant and uncertain, and the next hour the whole world was a roaring black curtain of rain and wind that made the walls of Thornfield Manor shake like a living thing breathing its last. Mara Thorne had learned to read that sky the way other women read books. She had lived on the mountain's edge for 4 years, just her and Lena and the small stone cottage attached to the manor's eastern kitchen. A cottage she rented for almost nothing from the old groundskeeper, Olvan, who asked no questions and accepted dried herbs and healing salves as partial payment because his knees had not worked right since the winter of his 53rd year. It was a quiet life, a careful life. Mara had built it that way on purpose. She was kneeling on the kitchen floor, laying out bundles of moonflower root to dry on the rack above the hearth, when she heard the horses. Not 1 or 2, a company. The kind of thunder that only came from armored men riding hard and not caring what or who they trampled in their urgency. The sound punched through the storm's noise like a fist through paper, and every nerve in Mara's body went tight. She rose slowly. Her hands were steady. Her hands were always steady. She had trained them to be, over years of working in conditions that would have broken steadier women than her. But her chest was doing something different. Her chest was performing a small, private collapse. Not tonight, she thought. Not with Lena already asleep. She moved to the window and looked out into the drowning dark. Torches. 6 of them, guttering wildly in the downpour, but held high enough that she could see the silver and black livery beneath the riding cloaks. The crest of the House of Vire. The wolf's head, jaws open, cut in silver thread on black wool. Mara's hand found the window ledge. She gripped it hard enough that the wood bit into her palm. Vire. The name alone was a wound. She had carried it for 4 years like a splinter embedded too deep to safely remove, always present, always aching, a small constant reminder of what she had survived and what she had lost. The village of Caldmere, the herb gardens her mother had planted and tended for 30 years, the neighbors she had grown up beside, the healer's lodge where she had trained and practiced and believed, foolishly, beautifully, fatally, that there was a future waiting for her in that valley. All of it gone in a single night of smoke and howling. And at the center of that night, always at the center, like the eye of a storm that never truly passed, him, Alpha Kalen Vire, the Silver Wolf, the Iron King of the Northern Reach. She had never seen his face clearly that night. She had only heard his voice, a sound like something ancient and furious being ripped out of the chest of a man who had long since stopped being only a man. And she had done the thing she still could not fully explain to herself, the thing that had no rational accounting in any healer's textbook she had ever read. She had sung to him, an old song, her grandmother's song, a melody so threadbare with age that it had no proper name anymore, only a feeling. The kind of feeling that reminded a creature in pain that pain was not permanent, that even the worst storm eventually exhaled. She had sung it into the chaos and the fire, and something in the night had gone still. Then she had run. She had been running ever since. The horses stopped in the courtyard. She heard shouting over the rain, short, clipped commands in a military register she recognized. And then the heavy slam of the manor's front door being thrown open without ceremony, without knocking, without any acknowledgement that a door existed primarily for the purposes of being knocked on. Mara stepped back from the window. She thought about Lena. She thought about the back door of the cottage, and the dark tree line 30 yards beyond it, and how far a woman could run in a rainstorm carrying a sleeping 4-year-old. Not far enough. Not with wolves. She squared her shoulders. She breathed. She picked up the small folding knife she used to strip herb stems and slid it into the pocket of her work apron. Not because she thought it would help, but because having it made her hands feel slightly less empty. The cottage door opened without a knock. He was enormous. That was always the first thing. The sheer architectural fact of a Vair soldier filling a doorway, 240 pounds of muscle and armor, and the particular kind of deliberate menace that came from years of being the most physically dangerous person in any given room. He had a jaw like a granite shelf, and eyes the color of old iron, and he looked at Mara the way a man looks at a piece of furniture he has been sent to move. Mara Thorne. It was not a question. "That depends," Mara said, keeping her voice even, "on who's asking and why they couldn't knock." Something shifted in the soldier's iron eyes. Not quite surprise, not quite respect, but the small recalibration of a man who had expected to find a frightened woman and found something slightly more inconvenient instead. He stepped into the cottage without invitation. 2 more soldiers filled the doorway behind him. "The Alpha is injured," he said. "You are the nearest healer with field training. You will come." Mara looked at the soldiers. She looked at the doorway. She looked at the small curtained alcove at the back of the cottage, where Lena was sleeping in her narrow bed, one arm thrown over the stuffed rabbit she had named Captain for reasons she had never fully explained. "My daughter is asleep," Mara said. "Bring her." "She's 4 years old, and it's the middle of a storm." "Bring her," the soldier said again, and this time there was no negotiation in it. There was only the flat certainty of a man who had been given an order and intended to complete it, and was entirely unbothered by whatever collateral inconvenience that completion might require. Mara looked at him for a long moment. The folding knife in her apron pocket was a small, absurd comfort. She thought about her mother's herb garden, 30 yards by 20, with the stone border her father had laid the summer before she was born. She thought about the smoke. "Give me 2 minutes," she said. "I need to pack my kit." "But spy me." She had expected blood. What she had not expected was this much of it. The Alpha King of the Northern Reach was lying on the kitchen floor of Thornfield Manor's main house. Not in a bed, not on a table, but on the actual stone floor, which told her immediately that whatever had happened fast and without warning, because if there had been any time at all, someone would have gotten the man to a horizontal surface with some dignity attached to it. Instead, he was sprawled at an angle between the butcher's block and the hearth, one arm extended, fingers curled loosely as though reaching for something he'd dropped, and the blood pooling beneath him was black-dark in the firelight and spreading with the particular unhurried confidence of a substance that had all the time in the world. He was huge. She had known he would be. Every account she had ever heard of Kaelin Vair prefaced itself with adjectives about his size, but knowing and seeing were different instruments, and the sight of him still landed with a physical weight, 6'4" at minimum. Shoulders like siege equipment, the silver-streaked dark hair plastered against a face that was, even now, even pale and slack with blood loss, architecturally structured in a way that made no fair argument for the universe's impartiality in the matter of appearances. He was also, quite clearly, dying. Mara set Lena down in the doorway. "Stay right here, baby. Don't move. Don't touch anything," and crossed the kitchen in 6 steps. Dropping to her knees in the blood without hesitation, because hesitation was a luxury she had trained out of herself a long time ago. She found the wound in the first 5 seconds. Left side, below the ribs, angled upward. A knife wound, but not a clean one. The blade had been thin and long, and it had gone in and been twisted, which meant either the person who did it was experienced in causing maximum damage, or was operating with a very specific and personal kind of hatred. She pressed her hand flat against the wound and felt for the heat signature. There. Running up from the wound's edge in thin, branching lines, faint but unmistakable to hands that had been trained to find it, the telltale tracking heat of a poisoned blade. "Oh no," Mara said quietly. "Can you help him?" The soldier from her cottage, she had gathered that his name was Garrett from the way the others addressed him, was standing directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a furnace. "That depends on the poison," Mara said. She was already opening her kit, fingers moving with their own independent intelligence across the rows of vials and packets. "What was the blade?" "We don't know." "Was there a smell when it came out? Sweet? Bitter? Like metal?" A pause. Garrett consulted with someone over her head. "Bitter. Like old silver." Mara's hand stopped. "Bitter. Like old silver." She knew that one. She knew it the way healers came to know the worst things, through a combination of study, story, and the particular cold dread that came from having once seen what it did to a body that didn't have someone fast and knowledgeable enough to interrupt it. Night wither. Rare. Expensive. The kind of compound that cost more than most soldiers made in a year, which told her with considerable precision what she was dealing with. This was not opportunistic violence. This was a commission. Someone had planned this. She had maybe 40 minutes before the compound finished its work, and the Alpha King of the Northern Reach became a very large, very attractive corpse on a kitchen floor. "I need," she said, her voice still even, hands already moving, "boiling water. Clean linen, not wool. And I need everyone who is not actively helping me to take 3 steps back and stop breathing down my neck." No one moved. "Now," Mara said. And something in her voice, some remnant of the healer's authority she had spent years suppressing, some muscle memory of a woman who had once commanded rooms full of panicked people and made them listen, cracked through the air like a whip. People moved. She'd worked in silence for the first 10 minutes. That was her practice. Silence first, to let the hands do what they knew, to let the mind sort through its catalog of responses without the interference of language. She drew out what she could of the compound with a drawing poultice, a process that required precision and patience in equal measure and was actively unpleasant for everyone involved, including the unconscious man on the floor, who made sounds that suggested some part of him was aware of what was happening, even in his current state. Lena watched from the doorway. She had been told to stay, and she was the kind of child who took instructions seriously, not out of timidity, but out of genuine consideration for the reasoning behind them. She was sitting cross-legged on the threshold with Captain the Rabbit in her lap, and her dark eyes moving between her mother and the man on the floor with an expression of focused, serious attention that was, in Mara's private opinion, both her daughter's most endearing and most unnerving quality. The soldiers had backed off as instructed, but they had not gone far. They were arranged in a rough semicircle at the kitchen's perimeter, watching with the controlled anxiety of men whose professional competence extended as far as violence and stopped abruptly at biology. Garrett stood nearest the door, arms crossed, jaw working. Mara reached for the next vial in her sequence, a clear compound that would begin neutralizing what the poultice had not reached, and as she lifted the Alpha's arm to access the vein at his inner elbow, the man's eyes opened. They were very dark. Not brown. Dark, the way deep water was dark, a color that had depth to it rather than simply pigment. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, which was not unusual. People coming back from the edge of unconsciousness often spent a few seconds reorienting, the mind reconvening itself from wherever blood loss had scattered it. Then his eyes found her face. Something happened in them. She could not have named it precisely. It was not recognition. She was certain of that. She had been careful for 4 years to be certain of it. And it was not the blank assessment of a man sizing up a stranger. It was something stranger and more unsettling than either of those things. A flicker, almost. The way a person's face moved when they heard a piece of music they almost remembered. A melody just at the edge of recall. "You," he said. His voice was a ruin, hoarse from pain and blood loss, stripped of whatever authority it normally carried. But even in ruins, it carried its own weight. "Don't talk," Mara said. "You've lost a significant amount of blood, and you have a compound in your system that is actively trying to kill you. Talking spends energy you currently cannot afford." His eyes stayed on her face, She had the uncomfortable sensation of being red, which was rich, coming from a man who was lying on a kitchen floor bleeding, but there it was. "You're the—" I said, "Don't talk." She pressed the vial against his vein and completed the injection with rather more force than was strictly necessary. "Whatever you think you know right now, table it. You can be wrong about it later when you are not dying." His jaw tightened. She had the sense he was not accustomed to being told to be quiet. She was fairly unbothered by this. She had told warlords to be quiet. She had once told a man who ran 3 territories to stop whining about a bone set, and he had, in fact, stopped whining. She returned her attention to his wound. She was so focused on the careful work of her hands that she almost missed it when Lena spoke. Almost. "Well, Mama?" Mara's hands kept moving. That man." A pause. Lena was doing what she always did before saying something important, which was collect it carefully from wherever small children collected important things and hold it for a moment, turning it over, making sure it was the right shape before releasing it. "My mama has the same scar." The room stopped. Not figuratively, actually physically, the room experienced a collective cessation of motion that Mara had never felt from a group of people before and hoped never to feel again. Every soldier went still. Garrett's arms uncrossed. The man on the floor, Alpha Kalen Vire, bleeding out, barely conscious, running on the last margin of his endurance, turned his head toward the doorway. Mara did not look up from her work. She kept her hands moving with a precision and steadiness that cost her every single reserve she had. "Lena," she said very quietly. "Sweetheart, I need you to wait outside." "But Mama, outside, baby, please." A pause that lasted 3 full seconds, which in the context of the current silence felt like geological time. Then the soft sound of small feet on stone, and the creak of the back door opening and closing. Mara exhaled through her nose. She kept working. "What scar?" Kalen's voice from just beside her ear. "I told you not to talk." "What?" "Scar." She set down her instruments with more care than she felt, because she was a professional, and professionals did not smash things, even when they dearly wanted to. She sat back on her heels and looked at him properly for the first time. Really looked, past the blood and the pallor and the enormity of him, into the dark water of his eyes. He was already looking at her left shoulder, at the collar of her work dress, which had slipped in the process of leaning over him, revealing the edge of what lived there. A scar, old and silver-faded now, but still clearly legible, a curved mark running from just below the ridge of her collarbone to the point of her shoulder, thin as a thread and shaped by some grotesque coincidence or something far less comfortable than coincidence, like the profile of a crescent moon. And this was the thing Mara had spent 4 years not allowing herself to think, like a wolf's claw. He had the same one. She could see the upper edge of it above his collar, even now, even half buried in shadow and dried blood. She had told herself for 4 years that it was a coincidence. She had constructed very thorough, very well-reasoned arguments for why it was a coincidence. She had built an entire house of careful logic around the coincidence and lived in it and furnished it and never once looked directly at the walls. He was looking at her with the expression of a man whose house of logic had just, without warning, fallen in. "When did you get that scar?" he said. Mara picked up her instruments. She resumed working. Her hands were perfectly steady. 4 years ago, she said, a village called Caldmere. The silence that followed was the longest of her life, longer than the night she had run through burning fields with an infant pressed to her chest, longer than the months afterward when she had thought every sound in the dark was wolves coming to finish the job, longer than the quiet years of hiding and hoping and telling herself that small and invisible was the same thing as safe. "I remember a song," he said finally. His voice was different now, rougher, stripped of all its command register, something underneath it that sounded almost like a man rather than a title. "The night of Caldmere, I was losing control of the shift. Something was wrong with me that night, something I'd never—" And then someone sang, just a few lines, and it pulled me back. Mara said nothing. Her hands kept moving. "That was you," he said. Still nothing. Still, wasn't it? She pressed the final compress against his wound with perhaps more firmness than was medically indicated. "You're going to live," she said. "The compound will be fully neutralized within the hour. You'll need to stay still and drink everything I leave with your men, and not, absolutely not, attempt to shift for at least 72 hours, or you will undo everything I've just done and bleed internally in a way that even I cannot fix. Do you understand me?" A pause. "Yes," he said. "Good." She began packing her kit. Her hands were still steady. That was important. The hands had to stay steady, because if the hands stopped being steady, then everything else would follow. "Your daughter," he said. "My daughter is none of your business. Her eyes are her own." Mara closed the clasps on her kit with 3 precise final clicks. "She is 4 years old, and she is mine, and she is not a piece of any puzzle you are currently assembling in your head. Do you understand me?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful in a way she had not expected from a man of his reputation, measured like someone placing weight on ice they were not fully certain would hold. "What is her name?" Mara stood. She looked down at him one last time, this enormous, bleeding, world-altering problem lying on a kitchen floor in the rain, and she felt the full weight of the choice she was about to not make, the answer she was about to not give. "You are alive because I chose to help you," she said. "That choice cost me something. Don't make me regret it by asking questions I'm not prepared to answer." She picked up her kit and walked to the door. "Mara." She stopped. She did not turn around. "But thank you," he said, quietly, not with the practiced grace of a ruler delivering gratitude as a political instrument, with something rawer than that, something that sounded improbably like a person. Mara stood in the doorway for 1 breath, 2 breaths. The rain hammered the roof. Somewhere in the courtyard, horses stamped and snorted against the weather. She walked out. Lena was on the covered step outside the back door, Captain held tightly against her chest, watching the rain fall in sheets across the dark courtyard. She looked up when Mara came out, and her expression was the precise combination of worried and resolute that Mara had come to privately call her little commander face. The look Lena wore when she was prepared for bad news and had already decided how she felt about it. Mara sat down next to her daughter on the step. She put her arm around Lena's small shoulders and pulled her in, and Lena leaned against her the way she always did, completely, without reservation, with the total physical trust of a child who had only ever been held safely. "Is the man going to die?" Lena asked. "No," Mara said. "He's going to be fine." "He looked very sad." Mara looked out at the rain. "People who are bleeding often look sad." "No," Lena said, with the patient certainty she used to correct adults who had missed the point. "He looked sad before, in his eyes, like when you think I'm not looking and you look at the mountain." Mara was quiet for a moment. "You're very observant," she said finally. "You always say that like it's a problem." "It's not a problem, it's just—" Mara pressed her lips against the top of Lena's head, against the dark hair that smelled like wood smoke and sleep. "Sometimes things are complicated, baby." "Are we complicated?" "We're the most complicated things in the whole mountain," Mara said, and Lena laughed. A sound like water finding a stone to run over, small and clear and completely without shadow. They sat together in the rain for a long time. The soldiers moved in and out of the manor with their torches, and the horses eventually settled, and the storm began its slow, grudging departure from the sky above the Ashvale peaks. Mara did not sleep that night. She sat at her cottage window until the first gray light came over the eastern ridge, and she thought about a song her grandmother had taught her, and a scar shaped like the profile of a crescent moon, and the dark water of a dying king's eyes when they found her face. And she thought about Lena. He looked sad before. In his eyes. Like when you think I'm not looking and you look at the mountain. Mara Thorne had spent 4 years being very careful, very precise, very controlled. She had the sinking, comprehensive feeling that careful was no longer going to be enough. The soldiers left before dawn. Garrett came to her cottage door. He knocked this time, which she noted, and informed her that the Alpha had been stabilized and would be transported to Asheville Fortress at first light with a full escort. He set a small leather purse on her threshold without ceremony. For your services, he said. I don't want it. He looked at her. It wasn't an offering. It's a fee. The Alpha insists. Mara looked at the purse. She thought about the winter coming and Lena's boots, which had developed a hole in the left sole that she had been patching with leather strips for 2 months. She thought about principles and the specific grinding practicality of poverty, and the way those two things rarely manage to coexist without one of them sustaining significant damage. She picked up the purse. Tell him we're even. Garrett almost smiled. It was a very small, almost smile, the kind that appeared and disappeared so fast she could have questioned whether she'd seen it at all. Yes, ma'am, he said, and left. Mara listened to the horses until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then she listened to the quiet that came after. She had saved the king who had destroyed her home. She did not know yet what that meant. She did not know what it would cost her, or what it would set in motion, or what pieces were already moving on a board she couldn't see. She only knew that Lena was asleep in the next room, her small hand curled around Captain's worn ear, and that the mountain was beginning to turn gold at its eastern peak, and that for this one morning, in this one small window of time, they were safe. She only knew that. For now, it would have to be enough. The summons arrived 3 weeks later. It came in a black-sealed envelope carried by a single rider who did not stop for conversation, who handed it over, waited for acknowledgement, and rode back down the mountain as though the mountain itself had somewhere more urgent to be. The wax seal was the wolf's head crest of House Vire. The handwriting inside was precise and angular and entirely devoid of ornamentation. Mara Thorne. Your skills are required at Ashvale Fortress. You will be provided safe passage, quarters, and compensation commensurate with your rank as healer. Your daughter will be accommodated. This is a professional invitation, not a command. K. Vire. Mara read it 3 times. She set it on the table. She made tea. She drank the tea. She read it a 4th time. Mama, Lena said from across the table, where she was very seriously constructing something architectural out of dried herb bundles. What does that say? It's a letter. From the sad man? Mara looked at her daughter, at the dark eyes and the determined small jaw and the hands that were shaped, she had always told herself, like Mara's own. She had always told herself that. Yes, she said. From the sad man. Lena considered this with the gravity it apparently deserved. Are we going to go? I haven't decided. I think we should go, Lena said, and resumed her architectural work with the confidence of someone who considered the matter settled. Outside, the mountain wind came down through the tree line and pressed against the cottage walls, testing, as it always did, for weakness, finding none. Moving on. Mara picked up the letter again. Not a command, it said. She had lived her entire adult life under commands she hadn't chosen. The commands of circumstance, of poverty, of fear, of the specific weight of being a woman alone in a world that moved around women alone, the way rivers moved around large inconvenient rocks. Not a command. She thought about the man on the floor, the dark eyes that had found her face with that strange flickering recognition. The voice that had said thank you, like a person rather than a title. She thought about the scar on her shoulder and the scar on his, and the thing she had been refusing to look at directly for 4 years because looking at it directly meant admitting that the world was significantly stranger and more tangled than she had allowed herself to believe. She folded the letter. She put it in the pocket of her apron. We'll think about it, she told Lena. Lena smiled and added another herb bundle to her tower. The wind moved on, and the mountain kept its silence, the way mountains always did, patient, enormous, full of things it had not yet chosen to say. She made the decision on a Tuesday. Not because Tuesday held any particular significance. It didn't. It was as gray and unremarkable as every other day that late autumn pressed down on the Ashvale Mountains. But because that was the morning Lena's left boot finally gave up entirely, the patched sole separating from the upper in a decisive, irreversible split that left her daughter standing in the doorway of the cottage with one wet sock and an expression of philosophical resignation that no 4-year-old should have had to develop. Mara looked at the boot. She looked at her daughter's face. She looked at the leather purse from Garrett, which she had counted 3 times, and which would cover the boot and perhaps 2 months of dried goods and not much else. Then she went to her apron pocket and took out the letter she had been carrying for 3 weeks, like a splinter she hadn't yet decided whether to remove. She read it one more time. Not a command. "Go get Captain," she told Lena. "We're packing." The road to Asheville Fortress took 2 days by cart, and Mara spent most of both days in the particular private hell of a person who has made a decision and cannot yet determine whether it was brave or simply desperate. The mountain road was narrow and brutal in the autumn, ledges that fell away into nothing on the eastern side, wind that came screaming off the high peaks with personal intent, a cold that reached inside your clothing and made itself at home against your skin regardless of how many layers you wore. Lena was unbothered by all of it. She sat in the back of the hired cart with Captain on her lap and watched the mountain pass with wide, serious eyes, narrating what she saw in the quiet murmur she used when she was cataloging the world. Big rock, small rock, bird, another bird, that cloud looks like a horse. Mama, is the horse one a good sign? And Mara listened to her daughter's voice and held the sound of it like a torch in the dark. The fortress appeared on the afternoon of the second day, and it was exactly what its reputation had promised. Enormous, severe, built into the mountain's northern face as though the mountain had simply grown it there over centuries of geological patience. Black stone walls, towers that caught the last light and held it grudgingly. The wolf's head crest carved into the gatehouse arch in granite, large enough to stand inside. The gate guards had been expecting them. That was the first surprise. Garrett met them in the outer courtyard. Not a footman, not a minor official, but Garrett himself, which told Mara something about the level of specific attention that had been paid to their arrival that she did not entirely know how to receive. "Mara Thorne," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that had changed from the last time, though she could not immediately locate the change. Less furniture, more person. "The Alpha is in the East Wing. He's asked to see you when you're settled." "I'd like to see the quarters first," Mara said, "and Lena needs something to eat." "Of course. And I want to be clear before I see anyone or do anything that my presence here is professional. I am a healer. Whatever other—" She paused, chose words carefully. "Whatever other questions are in the air right now, my function here is medical. That's the boundary." Garrett looked at her with the expression of a man who had been thoroughly briefed on the situation and had opinions about it that he was professionally obligated not to share. "Understood," he said. Lena tugged on Garrett's sleeve. He looked down at her with the particular expression of a large military man suddenly confronted with a small child. A kind of careful recalibration, all edges pulled in. "Are you the king's friend?" Lena asked. "I work for the king," Garrett said. "That's not the same as being his friend," Lena pointed out. A pause. "No," Garrett said after a moment. "It isn't." Lena nodded gravely, apparently satisfied with this answer, and picked up Captain. "Okay, I'm ready to see the room now." The quarters were better than Mara had steeled herself to expect, which made her more suspicious rather than less. A 2-room suite in the east residential wing, a proper bedroom with a real mattress for Lena, and an adjoining room with a work table large enough to serve as a proper preparation space for her medicines. Someone had stocked it with basic supplies: clean linen, a set of ceramic mixing bowls, a rack of empty vials. Someone had thought about what a working healer would need and had, unusually, arrived at mostly correct conclusions. She stood in the doorway of the preparation room and thought about what it cost to set this up. Not in coin, in attention. In the decision to pay attention to her specifically, to think about what she would need, to prepare for her in the particular rather than the general. That cost something different than coin, and she was not sure she was ready to pay what it was asking in return. Lena bounced twice on the bedroom mattress, declared it acceptable, and was asleep with Captain in under 12 minutes. Mara covered her with the thick wool blanket from the foot of the bed, stood looking at her daughter's sleeping face for a moment, and then straightened, closed the bedroom door softly, and went to find the king. He was standing when she entered the study, which she had not expected, given that the last time she'd seen him, he had been horizontal and bleeding and closer to dead than to anything else. He was standing at the window with his back to the door, looking out at the mountain's northern face, and the first thing she clocked was that he was moving without the careful compensating stiffness of someone managing residual wound pain, which meant that either her treatment had worked even better than she'd estimated, or he was the kind of man who refused to let pain show in his posture even when alone. She suspected both. "Mara Thorne," he said, without turning. His voice was fully restored. No longer the ruined thing it had been on the kitchen floor, but the complete instrument she had heard described in half a dozen accounts she had never been able to entirely dismiss. Deep. Precise. The kind of voice that had learned to carry across large spaces without effort. "You're not supposed to be on your feet yet," she said. "I heal fast. Faster than night wither neutralization allows? Or faster than I said?" He turned then. And the thing she had not allowed herself to fully register on the kitchen floor, because there had been blood and crisis and the active management of everything she was feeling, which had taken up the considerable processing capacity she normally reserved for things like noticing what people looked like, landed with full force in the quiet of the study. He was not simply large. He was the kind of person who occupied space differently than other people, as though the air around him had agreed to make particular arrangements. The silver-streaked dark hair was clean and tied back now, and the angles of his face in the afternoon light were something between brutality and precision. A jaw that could have been carved, eyes that were doing that thing again, that dark-water thing, finding her face with a directness that felt like being read in a language she hadn't agreed to be written in. The scar was visible above his collar. She had not imagined it. "Sit down," she said, because she needed to be the one setting the terms of this, any terms at all, or the room would rebalance itself in a direction she couldn't afford. He sat. Across from her, at the study table with his hands resting open on the surface, a position she recognized after a moment as deliberate, unthreatening. This was a man choosing, with some care, how to occupy his own body. "I want to be clear about something," he said. "So do I. I'll go first." She pulled the letter from her pocket and set it on the table between them. "I'm here as a healer. That's my function and my limit. I don't have any interest in court politics, internal power arrangements, or whatever is happening with whoever put night wither on a blade and pointed it in your direction. I treat wounds, and I manage illness, and I prepare compounds. That's what I do." He looked at the letter. He looked at her. "All right. And Lena is your daughter," he said quietly. "I know." The room went very still. "She has your eyes," he said, "and your hands. The way she held the rabbit. The exact grip. I watched you with your kit." He paused. "But she also has a jaw that isn't yours." "Don't," Mara said. "I'm not making a claim." His voice was careful again, that ice-testing precision. I'm not going to walk into your life and start issuing declarations. That is not what I'm doing." "Then what are you doing?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind came off the mountain and pressed against the study window. A log shifted in the hearth. "I remember that night," he said. "I've remembered it for 4 years. It's the night I have most never been able to stop going back to, not because of the things I did, but because of the moment when everything stopped." He looked at his hands on the table. "I was losing the shift. That doesn't happen. I've held control since I was 17 years old. But that night, something was wrong with me, something I still don't fully understand, and I was gone. I was completely—" He stopped, rebuilt himself. And then someone sang 2 lines. That was all it took. 2 lines of the oldest song I have ever heard, and I came back to myself. Mara said nothing. The fire crackled. "I looked for her," he said. "Afterward, when I understood what had happened, I went back to find the healer who'd pulled me back, and there was nothing. Just ruins." He looked at her. "I looked for 2 years." "You burned the village," Mara said flatly. "My pack did. In a conflict I had already ordered stopped when I lost control of the shift. By the time I came back to myself, the damage was—" He stopped again. "There is no adequate sentence for what that was. I know that. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to understand what that night was." "I understand perfectly what that night was," Mara said. "I lived it." The space between them expanded and contracted with the particular physics of a conversation carrying too much weight. Mara was aware of the fire and the window, and the scar on her shoulder, and the small sleeping person in the room on the other side of the east wing wall, and the 4 years of careful, invisible life she had built, and the feeling, growing, undeniable, that it was already beginning to change shape around her without her permission. "The scar," she said finally. "How did you get it?" He looked at her steadily. "The night of Caldmere, during the worst of the shift, something cut me. I don't know what. I barely remember the physical part of it." "I was running," Mara said, "through the eastern fields. Your wolf was... You were between me and the tree line. I had a herb knife. I used it to..." She pressed her lips together. "I don't know if I was trying to stop you or just trying to get past. Maybe both." Silence. "You cut me," he said, not with anger, with something that sounded like the last piece of a puzzle settling into place, the sound of a long-held breath finally released. "I was trying to survive," she said, "and you cut me. We were both... It was chaos. Neither of us meant the other one to carry it." "No," he agreed. "We didn't." Another silence, this one different in quality. Not hostile, not charged, but the specific silence of two people who have said something true and are both sitting with the weight of it. "I need to ask you one thing," Kaylin said, "and I need you to understand that your answer doesn't change your position here. You have the room, you have the salary, your daughter has..." "Ask it," Mara said, because this circling was costing her something she could not name. He looked at her directly. "How old is Lena?" The fire crackled, the wind pressed the window, the mountain stood outside in its enormous patience. "4," Mara said. "She'll be 5 in the spring." The arithmetic was not complicated. He did it. She could see him do it. See the moment it completed itself behind his eyes. The date of Caldmere, the months after. The child born in a healer's cabin in the deep mountain winter with no one present but Mara herself, and the old midwife 2 valleys over who had asked no questions and been paid in foxglove tincture. He did not say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely even, and she could hear precisely what that cost him. "I won't push. I meant what I said, but I want you to know..." He stopped, reassembled. "I want you to know that if it's true, I will not walk away from it. Whatever that requires of me, I will do it. On your terms, at your pace, entirely on your terms." Mara stood. "I need time," she said. "You have it." She walked to the door. "Mara." She stopped, did not turn. "For what it's worth..." A pause. "I'm glad you didn't let me die." She stood in the doorway for 1 breath. 2. "So am I," she said, and was surprised to find that she meant it. That she had expected the fortress to be cold to her. She had prepared for it, the sideways looks, the careful social architecture of a closed community encountering an outsider, the particular breed of hostility that ran through military households like a current, invisible until you stepped into it. She had not prepared for how specific it would be. The court physician was a man named Aldrich Sorrel, 60-something, white-bearded, with the comfortable authority of a person who had held a prestigious position for a long time and had stopped questioning whether he deserved it. He met Mara in the fortress infirmary on her second morning with an expression she recognized immediately, the professional courtesy of a man who had decided to be gracious about something he found privately outrageous. "Mara Thorne," he said, extending his hand. "I understand you treated the Alpha in an emergency capacity." "That's correct." "With herb compounds." The pause after herbs was surgical. "With a night wither neutralization protocol using extracted moonflower alkaloids and a silver draw poultice," Mara said pleasantly, "which is the only treatment for late-stage night wither poisoning with a documented survival rate. What would you have used?" Sorrel's professional courtesy tightened slightly at the corners. "I simply mean that your methods are effective, unconventional." "I see." Mara looked around the infirmary with its orderly rows of standard-issue medical supplies. "Has anyone here treated night wither before? I ask because it's quite rare. Expensive compound, limited availability, tends to show up only in very targeted situations. If there's existing experience on staff, I'd welcome the collaboration. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know about the existing experience on staff with Night Wither. I'll be setting up in the East Preparation Room, she said. If you have any questions about the ongoing treatment protocol for the Alpha's recovery, my door is open. She left Sorel in the infirmary with his professional courtesy and the distinct impression that she had just acquired an enemy who would be careful about showing it. The court itself was a more complex organism. Ashvale Fortress housed perhaps 40 permanent residents beyond the guard rotation, lords of various minor territories who maintained quarters there for political purposes, senior soldiers, administrative staff, a handful of nobles who had attached themselves to the Alpha's household for the proximity to power that entailed. They were not unkind to Mara, most of them. They were something more sophisticated than unkind. They were uncertain, which, in the social ecosystem of a fortress court, translated practically to a kind of waiting watchfulness that she felt on her skin like weather. She was nobody. A mountain healer with no house name and no history they could verify, and a child who looked at powerful people like they were mildly interesting rocks. She had been brought in under the Alpha's specific attention, which meant she was potentially significant, which meant she was worth monitoring. And then there was the question everyone was clearly asking, and nobody was quite saying out loud, why her? Why specifically her? Why not Sorel, who had been the king's physician for 12 years? Why not one of the fortress healers? Why this woman from a mountain cottage? Mara heard it in the pauses. She saw it in the way conversation shifted when she entered rooms. She felt it in the particular quality of silence that followed Lena through the fortress halls, because Lena was impossible to ignore, being the kind of small person who greeted everyone she met with the serene directness of a diplomat who had never been taught that diplomacy required indirection. "You look tired," Lena told Lord Fenwick Haas on the third morning, a man of 50 who controlled 3 river territories and had the bearing of someone who had not been spoken to that frankly in decades. "I beg your pardon?" Haas said. "Your eyes," Lena explained patiently. "They have the heavy part. Mama says that means someone isn't sleeping enough. Are you sleeping enough?" Haas looked at the child, then at Mara, then back at the child. Possibly not," he said. "Mama has something for that," Lena offered. "It tastes bad, but it works." Haas blinked. He turned to Mara with an expression that had traveled in the space of 30 seconds, from mild condescension to genuine contemplation. "Does it?" "Valerian root compound in warm water," Mara said. "Yes." He sent a request to her preparation room that afternoon. She treated 4 of his household staff over the following week. Small things. A guard's infected hand wound that Sorel had been managing badly for a month. A young lord's persistent headaches that were stress-related and responding not at all to the powders Sorel had been prescribing. An elderly kitchen maid whose joints were being eaten alive by autumn damp. She did not announce herself. She did not campaign. She simply worked, quietly and well, the way she had always worked. And the fortress began, cautiously, grudgingly, in the particular manner of a closed community which has decided that someone is useful and is adjusting its position on them accordingly, to show her its edges. But not all of it, not the important parts. She noticed Darius Cade on the 4th day. Not because he was conspicuous, he was in fact the opposite. A man who had cultivated invisibility the way some men cultivated muscle or wealth, who was present in rooms without seeming to fill them, who moved through the fortress's social architecture like water finding channels it had previously cut. He was Kaelin's senior lieutenant. That much she gathered from Garrett, who had a soldier's economy with information but was surprisingly forthcoming when asked direct questions, which she suspected had less to do with her charm and more to do with the fact that Garrett was a man of genuine loyalty and had apparently decided that Mara warranted it. "How long has Cade been with the Alpha?" she asked, on the evening of the 4th day, finding Garrett in the outer courtyard during his watch change. Garrett's expression didn't shift, but something behind it did. 12 years. Came up through the ranks together. They served the northern border campaign side by side. That's a long friendship. Not agreement, not disagreement. A sound that occupied the precise space between them. "He doesn't like me," Mara said. "Cade doesn't like change," Garrett said carefully. He has a particular sense of how things should be ordered, and I'm not ordered correctly. A pause. You're a variable, Garrett said. Cade doesn't trust variables. Mara thought about this for a moment, standing in the cold courtyard while the watch change moved around them in its practiced choreography. She thought about the way Cade's eyes had moved over her the one time she had been in the same room with him. Not hostile, not overtly, but with the particular quality of assessment that preceded a decision rather than following one. He was here the night of the poisoning, she said. It was not a question. Garrett's pause was 1 second too long. Most of the senior staff were, he said. The Alpha was entertaining for a council session. Yes, Mara said. Of course. She left Garrett in the courtyard and went back inside, and she did not say what she was thinking, which was, night wither is expensive and rare and appears only in targeted situations. And if someone in this fortress had access to it and motive to use it, the list of candidates was not long. She was a healer. She treated wounds. She told herself to stay inside her boundaries. Quote, the memories came back gradually, the way things did when a mind decided it was finally safe to surface what it had been protecting. It happened in pieces, in the way dream fragments returned during quiet morning moments. Not a flood, but a drip, each drop carrying its own specific weight. Kaylin had asked to meet with her regularly. Professional consultations, he said, for the ongoing management of his recovery. She came to his study every other morning and sat across the work table from him and monitored his color, his pulse, the slow resolution of the compound's residual effects, and they talked, guardedly at first, and then with a growing ease that she tried not to examine too closely, because examining it led to noticing things she was not prepared to act on. He was, she discovered, a different thing than his reputation. The Iron King of the Northern Reach, in the privacy of a study with no audience, was a man with a dry sense of humor and a habit of honesty that he deployed with the precision of a surgical instrument. He did not perform. He did not soften things into palatability. He said what he meant and expected the same in return, and when she gave it, when she said, on the 6th morning, your recovery is slower on the left side because you have been using that arm, which I told you not to do. He did not bristle. You're right, he said. I'll stop. You won't. I'll try harder to stop. Better, she said. Something shifted in his face, and she looked away from it because what shifted there was dangerous in a way she could not articulate and did not want to. The memories came back most clearly on the 8th day. She was preparing compounds in her workroom, running through the familiar sequence of motion, measure, combine, test heat. When her hand stilled over a particular compound, a particular smell, and the night of Caldmere opened like a door she'd thought was locked. Not the fire, not the running, the moment before. She had been in the healer's lodge, and the chaos was coming, and she had gone to the window and seen the silver wolf at the edge of the eastern field, enormous, silver-gray in the firelight, moving with the terrifying fluid power of a creature that was not quite under the control of whatever mind was theoretically operating it, moving wrong. Not like a wolf on a hunt, like a wolf that was being operated from the inside by something that didn't know how the body worked. She had not thought. She had simply opened her mouth and sung. She understood, standing over her workroom bench, why she had never let herself look at this memory directly. Because looking at it meant understanding that she had not run from Kalen Vire that night. Not at that first moment. She had run toward him. She had put herself between the silver wolf and a group of fleeing villagers, and she had sung the oldest song she knew, because something in her healer's instinct had recognized the signs of a creature in crisis and had responded to crisis the only way it knew. She had helped him. Before the scar, before the running, before the 4 years of hiding, she had, in the most elemental and irreducible sense, already chosen him once before. The compound in her hands was perfectly blended. Her hands had kept working even while her mind was elsewhere. She looked at them. These hands that had saved his life twice now, across 4 years and an ocean of damage, and felt the ground shift beneath everything she thought she understood about her own story. She found him in the training yard that evening. She had not been looking for him. She had been walking Lena in the inner courtyard because Lena had declared a need for outdoor air with the authority of a small person who had been inside too long and was prepared to become inconvenient about it. And then Lena had found a path that led to the training yard, and Mara had not corrected the course quickly enough. He was sparring with Garrett, no armor. Just the simple working clothes of a man who trained because training was what he did, not because someone was watching. The silver wolf scar caught the last light. Lena stopped walking. She watched with the focused attention she brought to everything that interested her, head tilted, captain held loosely in the crook of her arm. "He's fast," she said. "Don't stare," Mara said. "You're staring," Lena pointed out. Mara was in fact staring. She stopped. She turned to redirect Lena back toward the inner courtyard, and it was precisely at that moment that Kaylin looked up from the spar and found her. Even across the training yard, in the low evening light, she could see the moment of recognition. Not her face this time, but the sight of Lena, the way he went absolutely still, the way the whole careful physical performance of sparring fell away from him in an instant, and what was left was just a man looking at a small girl with dark eyes and a determined jaw who was holding a stuffed rabbit and looking back at him with the frank appraisal of a child who had not yet learned to hide what she felt. Lena raised one hand and waved. After a moment, one breath, two, Kaylin raised his hand and waved back. Mara took her daughter's hand and walked back to the inner courtyard, with her heart doing something complicated and private that she was absolutely not going to examine right now. "He waved," Lena said, satisfied. "I saw," Mara said. "He's still sad," Lena said. "But less than before." It was Darius Cade who made the first visible move, and he made it carefully, as all his moves were careful. He came to her workroom on the 9th evening, knocked, waited, entered with the polished courtesy of a man who had decided that courtesy was the most useful disguise for what he was actually doing. He was lean and dark-haired, not physically imposing in the way of soldiers, but carrying the specific density of a man who had survived a long time in proximity to power by being very, very good at understanding what power required of him. "Mara Thorne," he said pleasantly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are," she said. "But go ahead." A slight tightening at the corners of his eyes. "I wanted to introduce myself properly. We haven't had the chance. I'm Darius Cade," she said. "Senior Lieutenant, 12 years with the Alpha. You served the Northern Border Campaign together." He processed this with the smoothness of a man who processed things smoothly as a professional practice. "You've done your research." "I treat patients who live here. I research my environment." "Sensible." He looked around the workroom with mild, apparently casual interest. His eyes moved over the compound preparations with the particular attention of someone who knew enough to ask useful questions. "You've made quite an impression in a short time." "I've done my job," she said. "Yes." A pause. "The Alpha speaks highly of you." "That's kind of him." "He's not usually kind." Cade smiled. It was an excellent smile. Warm, slightly self-deprecating, the kind of smile that a person constructed over years of practice specifically because it looked like the opposite of what it was. "He's a good man, a strong Alpha. The North needs that stability right now, particularly with everything that's been unsettled since the poisoning." Mara said, making a notation in her compound record. "It would be a shame," Cade said pleasantly, "if additional instabilities arose during the recovery period. Court politics can be consuming, distracting, particularly for someone in a sensitive position who might inadvertently find themselves caught in currents they don't understand." Mara set down her pen. She looked at him. "Is that a warning, Lieutenant?" "It's a concern," he said, expressed collegially. "I see." She picked up her pen again. "Thank you for your concern. I'll keep it in mind." He left. She looked at the closed door for a long moment after he was gone, and she thought about currents, and about the very specific smell of old silver, and about a man who had been in proximity to power for 12 years and knew very well how to hide what he was doing. She thought about the cost of Nightwither. She thought about who, in this fortress, could have afforded it, and who would have had reason to spend it. She was a healer. She stayed inside her boundaries. She looked at the compound records in front of her and thought about the fact that the same alkaloid base used in Nightwither synthesis appeared in 3 legitimate medical preparations, 2 of which she had found in the fortress infirmary stores when she inventoried them on her second day. She was a healer. She pulled the inventory notes from her files and began a very careful, very quiet cross-reference. She stayed inside her boundaries. She just moved the boundaries slightly. Kaylin found her in the library at midnight. She had not expected to be found. She had waited until the fortress was quiet, until the night watch changed and the corridors emptied, and she had taken her notes to the library because the library was the only room she'd found with a table large enough to spread them properly. He stood in the doorway, took in the spread of papers, and said nothing for a moment. "You should be asleep," she said. "So should you." He crossed the room and looked down at the papers without touching them. She watched him read. He was fast. Military precision, eyes moving in efficient horizontals, pulling the relevant information out of the data with the practiced speed of a man who had spent years making decisions from incomplete field reports. His jaw tightened. "The infirmary stocks," he said. "Someone accessed the storage room between the 10th and 14th of last month," she said. "I found the gap in the inventory. It's small. Only someone who knew exactly what they were looking for would have taken only what was needed. And the specific combination that was removed maps directly to a night wither synthesis," he said quietly. "Yes." He was still. The fire in the library hearth was low, and in its light his face had the particular stillness of a man deciding what to do with something he had suspected and was now confirmed in. "Kate has access to the infirmary stores," he said. "Not a question." "Most senior staff do," Mara said carefully. "I'm not. He came to see you." She looked at him. "Garrett told me," he said, and his voice was flat in a way it hadn't been before. "What did he say?" "He expressed concerns," she said. Collegially. Kaylin looked at her. "He told you to leave. He told me to be careful about instabilities." The fire crackled. The wind found the library window and pressed on it, testing. "I need to handle this carefully," he said. "If I move on him without complete evidence—" "There are loyal members of the council," Mara said. 3, I think, based on what I've observed. Haas is one of them. He's not a political man, he's a practical one, and he's been watching Cade the way practical men watch things that don't sit right with them. Kaylin looked at her for a long moment. "How long have you been doing this?" "I've been a healer in difficult places my entire adult life," she said. "Paying attention to who's in the room is not optional when you're the person everyone calls when things go wrong. I notice things." "You noticed Cade in 4 days." "He wanted me to notice him," she said. "That was the point. He wanted me to understand that I was visible, and that he had assessed me and found me something to be managed. What he didn't account for was that the same visit let me assess him." Kaylin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different. Something underneath the formal register that had been carefully in place since her arrival, something older and less managed. "I trust you," he said. "I don't know yet if I have the right to say that to you, given everything, but I'm saying it." Mara looked at the papers on the table, the quiet evidence of a conspiracy that was moving around them both like weather, building toward a front that had not yet broken. "Don't trust me," she said. "Trust the evidence. Trust what the numbers say." "Both," he said. "I trust both." She looked at him then. This man who had destroyed her home and was doing his honest best to account for it. This man who had waved at her daughter across a training yard with an expression that had nothing practiced in it. And she thought about the night she had sung to a silver wolf in a burning field, and the wolf had come back to itself. "We need more evidence," she said, "and we need it before he knows we're looking." "Agreed. And we need to be very careful," she said, "because whatever he's planning, he hasn't finished planning it yet. And men who haven't finished planning yet are more dangerous than men who have." Kaylin looked at her. "You think he'll move again?" "I think," Mara said carefully, "that someone who has already tried once and failed tends to try again, faster, before the window closes." She gathered her papers. "And I think someone who came to warn me off after 9 days had a reason to want me gone that goes beyond professional territory. Whatever he's doing, he's decided I'm a problem." "You are a problem," Kaylin said, and the way he said it, dry, certain, with something underneath it that she refused to look at directly, landed differently than it was meant to. She picked up her notes. She walked to the door. "Get some sleep," she said, "and keep your left arm rested. I mean it this time." She walked out of the library and back through the quiet fortress corridors, her notes held against her chest, and behind her she could feel the particular weight of a situation that had moved, without anyone's explicit permission, significantly past the point where healer and patient covered it. The wind pressed the windows. The fortress breathed around her, full of its sleeping politics and its careful watchfulness, and its one large specific danger that was moving in the dark like water finding channels it had previously cut. Mara walked back to her rooms, checked on Lena, small and certain in her sleep, one hand curled around Captain's ear, and sat down at her workroom bench. She was still inside her boundaries. She had just become very clear about what her boundaries actually were. This fortress, these people, this child asleep in the next room. Wherever the current ran, she would not be moved out of it. Not by Darius Cade. Not by anyone. She worked for 3 more days before Cade made his move. In retrospect, she would recognize that 3 days was exactly as long as it took a careful man to understand that his warning had not landed the way he intended, that the variable he had come to assess had assessed him back, and that the window he was operating in was narrowing faster than he had planned for. 3 days was the amount of time a man like Darius Cade needed to stop being careful and start being fast. And fast men who had been careful for a long time were the most dangerous kind, because they still had all the tools of caution even when they had abandoned the practice of it. She did not see it coming in the form it arrived. That was her mistake, and she would own it completely, later, in the specific way that survivors owned their mistakes. Not with self-destruction, but with the hard, clear accounting of a person who intended never to make the same error twice. She was in the inner courtyard with Lena on the 12th morning, teaching her daughter the names of the mountain herbs she had arranged in small pots along the courtyard wall. It was the kind of ordinary moment that Mara had learned to hold carefully, like water in cupped hands, fleeting, precious, always at risk of spilling. Lena was crouched over a pot of dried winter moss, saying its name with the gravity of a student who understood that names were important when the fortress bell rang. Not the watch bell, the emergency bell. 3 short strikes, pause, 3 more, the signal that cut through stone walls and morning routines and everything else, and pulled every trained body in the fortress toward the sound of it. Mara straightened. Her hands went still. "Stay here," she told Lena. She pressed her daughter's shoulders. "Right here. Do you understand? Don't move. Don't follow anyone. Stay." Lena looked up at her, the small commander face. "Is someone hurt?" "I don't know yet. Stay." She was already moving. The Alpha's private study was on the 2nd level of the East Wing, and she heard the chaos before she reached the staircase. Voices, boots on stone, the particular acoustic quality of a crisis that was simultaneously very large and very contained, as though everyone present understood the importance of not letting it spill past the walls. Garrett met her in the corridor. His face told her everything before his mouth did. "Poison," he said, again. He was at his morning correspondence, and Sorrel's with him, but "Move," Mara said, and Garrett, to his enormous credit, moved. Kalen was in the chair behind his writing desk, which was both better and worse than the kitchen floor. Better, because he was upright and conscious. Worse, because the fact that he was upright and conscious while his color was the particular gray-white of someone whose circulatory system was working overtime to compensate for something it should not have had to compensate for, told her that whatever was in him was working fast and targeting the blood directly. Sorrel was beside him with the particular frozen competence of a man whose training had never included anything this specific. He turned when she entered, and the look on his face, not hostility, not territorial, but the genuine desperate relief of a man who knew he was out of his depth and was past the point of caring about his dignity, told her more about the seriousness of what they were dealing with than any symptom catalog. "I don't know what it is," Sorrel said. "His pulse is irregular. He says his vision is dimming at the edges." She was already there, already her hands on him, already reading the heat signature through his skin. Different from night wither. This was something that moved faster, something that hit the nervous system in addition to the blood. She could feel the tremor just starting in his left hand, fine and high and wrong, the kind of tremor that preceded full neurological involvement, and she had maybe 20 minutes before it reached his heart. "The decanter," she said. "On the desk. Who poured his morning drink?" Silence. "Who poured it?" "The household staff," someone offered from the doorway. "The usual morning routine. Get me the decanter. Don't touch the pour. Bring me the whole thing, carefully." She was pulling her kit open without looking at it, hands reading the vials by shape and weight the way she had trained them over years of working in conditions where looking away meant someone died. "And I need everyone who is not me or Sorrel out of this room. Now. Anyone who poured a drink within the last 8 hours is to be detained. I don't care what rank. I don't care what relationship. Detained and not talking to each other." The room cleared. Sorrel stayed. He watched her work with an expression that had crossed out of professional rivalry entirely and landed somewhere in pure, unadorned attention. "What is it?" he asked. "Asheville crawlweed extract, processed fine, probably introduced in the decanter's pour spout, so it dissolved on contact. Extremely expensive, extremely specific." She was already completing the first injection, a counteragent for the neural component, buying time if nothing else. "Someone has a very good supplier and a very detailed knowledge of the Alpha's morning routine." Kalen's hand found her wrist. His grip was weaker than it had been 12 days ago. That alone told her how fast this was moving, but it was deliberate. "Mara," his voice was tight, controlled. "The evidence from the library." "I know. Is it enough?" She looked at him. His eyes were dark and clear and present even through the gray pallor, even through the effort it was taking him to hold himself upright and functional. A man who was refusing, with every piece of himself, to go down. "Not yet," she said. "I need more time." "You may not have it," he said, and she understood from his tone that he was not talking about the poison. Son. She had Kalen stable within 25 minutes. Stable, but weak. Weaker than after the first poisoning because this compound had a cumulative interaction with whatever residual traces of night wither remained in his bloodstream, and the combination was doing things to his physiology that she was going to need to monitor aggressively for the next 48 hours. She sent Sorrel to the infirmary for additional supplies and sat back on her heels and thought, with the fast, cold clarity of a woman who was out of time for being careful. Cade had moved. He had moved while she was in the courtyard with Lena, while the morning was ordinary and the herbs were named and the world was temporarily small and manageable. He had moved quickly and precisely and with a specific knowledge of the Alpha's routine that required either direct access or a very well-placed informant in the household. He had also, she realized, moved on a morning when Garrett was on the outer gate rotation, which meant Garrett had not been in the inner corridors, which meant the person who would most reliably have noticed an irregularity in the household routine had been positioned, deliberately or not, away from the relevant location. The chess of it was almost elegant. If she hadn't been sitting next to its target, she might have admired it professionally. "I need you to rest," she told Kalen. "You have no negotiable options on that. Your body needs everything it has right now for the counteragent to work, and if you push—" "I know," he said. "Do you? Because the last time I told you not to use your left arm—" "I know, Mara." His voice was quiet. "I trust you. Tell me what you need me to do, and I'll do it." She looked at him for a moment. The trust landed the way it always did. Plainly, without performance. The kind that cost something real to extend. She had spent 4 years not trusting anyone with anything significant, and she recognized its quality when she encountered it. "Rest," she said. "Real rest. And let Garrett handle the internal investigation. Don't involve yourself until you have more strength, because if Cade sees you moving, he'll accelerate." "And you?" "I'm going to find the rest of the evidence." He caught her hand as she stood. Not restraining, just contact, brief, the kind that meant something different from all the formal courtesy of the previous 12 days. "Be careful," he said. "I'm always careful," she said. She was lying. But it was the kind of lie that a person told when they had already decided to stop being careful and wanted to protect someone else from the weight of that decision. Ita. She found the rest of the evidence in the infirmary supply room that afternoon. Not the alkaloid gap she'd already found. Something new. A sealed case behind the secondary compound rack, small and dark, and requiring a key she found inside Sorrel's desk cabinet, inside a false bottom that a better lockbox maker might have disguised more convincingly. Inside the case, wrapped in oilcloth, 3 vials of a compound she recognized by color and viscosity before she'd even opened the seal. Ashvale crawlweed, processed, enough for 2 more doses at minimum. There was also a letter. Folded twice, no seal, the handwriting the same angular script she had seen on the Alpha's council correspondence. Official notation, the kind produced by someone with a court position and regular access to official communication. She read it once. Then she read it again, slowly, making sure her mind was building the right picture. The letter was to a name she didn't know, a lord from the Eastern Territories, judging by the formal address, and it outlined, in the clean economic language of a man who had been planning for a long time, the terms of what came after. The transition of Alpha authority. The new arrangements for territorial governance. The permanent solution to the question of external variables that had arrived at the fortress and complicated the succession. External variables. Her hands were completely steady. She noted this with a kind of distant professionalism, the way she noted useful clinical data. The hands were steady, and the mind was steady, and she was going to get this letter and these vials to Garrett, and then she was going to collect Lena from the courtyard, and then the door to the supply room opened. There were 3 of them. She did not know the 2 behind, but Darius Cade she knew, and she knew from the way he was standing, no longer performing the warm courtesy of his earlier visit, wearing instead the face he had apparently decided she no longer needed to be protected from. That he had heard the bell, understood what it meant, understood that the morning had not gone according to his plans, and had arrived at the only remaining option. "Mara Thorne," he said. He looked at the case in her hands. Something crossed his face that was too complex and too fast to read fully, but the core of it was a man recalibrating at speed. "That belongs to me." "The court physician's supply room doesn't belong to you," she said. Her voice was even. The hands were steady. She had the case and the letter, and she was standing between Cade and the door, and she had a folding knife in her apron pocket, and the comfortable knowledge that folding knives were not going to be any help in this particular situation. "And I think the council would be very interested in what's in this case." "The council," Cade said, "will hear whatever I tell them." "Will they?" "You're a mountain healer with no house name, no history in this court, and a very convenient 4-year-old whose parentage has everyone very interested and nobody quite willing to say anything about." He took a step toward her. "You're a distraction. An attractive one, I'll grant the Alpha his taste, but a distraction. And distractions, in my experience, are most effectively dealt with by removal." "You've been trying to remove the Alpha," she said. "Why? What does his death get you specifically?" It was the wrong question for the situation, the tactically wrong question. The question that kept him talking when what she should have been doing was screaming and running and finding Garrett. She knew that. She asked it anyway, because information was the one weapon she consistently had access to, and because part of her mind was still performing the function of a healer, still cataloging and documenting and building the complete picture, even while the rest of her mind was very clearly aware that she was about to be in serious danger. "Kalen Vire is a sentimental man," Cade said, still moving. "He sees an interesting woman, a child with his jaw, and he starts to think about futures instead of strategy. He starts to trust outside the established structure. That's how pacts break." His voice was still perfectly pleasant, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. "I've spent 12 years building this house. I am not going to watch it fall because a healer walked down from a mountain and remembered a song." He was 4 feet from her. The 2 soldiers behind him had spread to block the door. "Where is my daughter?" Mara said, and her voice was not quite as steady on this question as on the others. "Safe," he said. "For now. Entirely contingent on your cooperation." He extended his hand for the case. "Give me that. Tell me where your notes are, and then pack your things and take your daughter and go back to your mountain cottage and never come back. That's the offer. It expires in approximately 10 seconds. Mara looked at him. She looked at the soldiers behind him. She looked at the case in her hands, the evidence, the letter, the carefully documented proof of a conspiracy that had been moving through this fortress for months. And she thought about everything that happened when people like Cade were allowed to finish what they started. She thought about Caldmere, the smoke, The ruins. She thought about the way Kaylin had waved at Lena across the training yard. She threw the case, not at Cade, past him, to the left, toward the far wall of the supply room, hard enough that it hit the stone and skidded under the lower rack, the vials scattering, the letters sliding out across the floor in a clear white sheet. And she screamed. Not a scream of fear, though fear was there, she was not pretending otherwise, but the specific, trained, maximum volume scream of a woman who had been a field healer in 3 conflict zones and knew that the human voice at full capacity carried through stone walls better than any other alarm. She screamed the one word that would mean something to every trained soldier in the fortress. Treason. Why, what happened after happened fast. Cade moved toward her and she moved back, and the supply room was small, which was the only advantage she had. Too small for all 3 of them to come at her simultaneously without interfering with each other. She put the shelf rack between herself and the nearest soldier, and she screamed again, and she thought Lena, who is with Lena, and she used the folding knife on the second soldier's forearm when he got close enough to matter, not because it stopped him, but because it slowed him for the 3 seconds she needed to reach the door. She did not reach the door. Cade caught her arm with the efficiency of a man who had spent 12 years being very good at the physical mechanics of control. He was not brutal about it, which was in its own way more frightening than brutality would have been, because it told her that he was entirely unbothered by this, that what he was doing registered to him as something closer to administration than violence. That, he said almost gently, was a mistake. She looked him in the eyes. Where is my daughter? Somewhere safe, somewhere quiet. She'll stay that way as long as you do. She went still. Not from fear, from the precise, comprehensive calculus of a mother who has just had her leverage removed and is running the numbers on what options remain. The answer to that calculation was not comfortable. I want to see her, Mara said. Later. Now. Later. For the first time, the pleasantness slipped. Just for a moment, just a hairline fracture in the surface, but she saw underneath it the cold, exhausted fury of a man who had been managing complications for too long and was running out of patience for them. You are going to come with me, and you are going to be very quiet, and when the time is appropriate, I will show you your daughter, and you are going to stop performing. He looked at her steadily. You're intelligent enough to understand the arithmetic. You help me. She's fine. You continue this, she becomes a problem I need to solve. Mara held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she let her shoulders drop. He read it as capitulation. She let him read it that way. The evidence is on the floor, she thought, as they walked her out of the supply room and down the lower corridor. The letter is in plain sight under the rack. Someone will find it. Someone will find it, and Garrett will... She thought about Lena. She thought about Garrett, and whether Garrett had heard her scream, and whether it had carried, and whether any of this mattered if Lena was already... She pulled herself back from that edge with both hands. Not useful. The fear is not useful right now. Think, Mats. The fortress had a dungeon level. She had known this academically, the way one knew the architectural facts of a place without having cause to engage with them directly. It was below the inner courtyard, carved into the mountain's foundation, cold the way stone was cold when it had never seen sunlight. A deep settled cold that existed not as weather, but as a physical property of the place itself. The cell they put her in had an iron door and a single torch bracket on the opposite wall and a stone floor that was clean, which told her it was used infrequently, which told her that Cade had not planned on this specific outcome but had arranged for its possibility. A careful man, all the way down. She sat on the floor and cataloged what she had. The folding knife was gone. They had taken it along with her kit and her apron. She had her dress, her boots, and the information currently stored in her head, which was considerably more than Cade knew about, and which was, she decided, going to have to be enough. She thought about the compound room and the evidence on the floor, and whether Sorrel had gone back to collect his additional supplies, and whether Sorrel, who had looked at her with that particular desperate relief during Kaylin's second poisoning, was ultimately a man who could be trusted to do the right thing when the right thing was inconvenient for him professionally. She thought about Lena. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and breathed in through her nose, 4 counts, out through her mouth, 4 counts. The same controlled pattern she used when patients were dying and panic would not help them. She ran it until her chest stopped doing its private collapse, and her mind cleared back to the sharp functional tool she needed it to be. Kaelin is weakened, but not incapacitated. He will notice I'm gone. Garrett will notice. The question is how quickly, and whether Cade has arranged to manage those notifications. Lena is leverage, which means she's safe as long as she's leverage. The moment I'm no longer useful, she stops being leverage and becomes a problem. The letter is on the floor of the supply room, if anyone finds it before Cade does. The torch in the bracket across the corridor from her cell door guttered in a draft she couldn't feel, and she heard the distant sound of a door opening somewhere above her and then footsteps on stone descending. She rose. He looked worse than she had ever seen him look, which was saying something, given that she had seen him bleeding out on a kitchen floor in the rain. His color was still wrong, the gray-white pallor of the second poisoning combined now with the physical cost of moving under his own power when she had explicitly told him not to, a combination that was doing visible damage to the careful stability she had managed to build in him over the previous 25 minutes of treatment. He should not have been on his feet. He absolutely should not have descended stairs. He was here anyway. "You're an idiot," she said. "Probably," Kaelin agreed. Garrett was at his shoulder, and she could see from Garrett's face that the trip down here had been Kaelin's decision, and Garrett's objection, and the particular outcome that resulted when an Alpha King decided to do something regardless of everyone's professional reservations. "How did you—" "Sorrel found the evidence," Garrett said. "He brought it to me personally. We heard about the supply room. One of the kitchen maids saw you being taken." A pause. "Lena is with Lady Haas. She's safe. Lord Haas has his people on her." Something in Mara's chest released. She had not been fully aware of how tightly she had been holding that particular piece until it let go, and the release of it made the world briefly unstable in a way she refused to show. "Thank you," she said quietly. Kaelin was at the cell door. He looked at her through the iron bars with an expression that was trying very hard to be controlled and not entirely succeeding. "Are you hurt?" "No." "The knife wound?" "A scratch." "I'm fine." She looked at him, the pallor, the effort it was taking him to stand evenly, the careful way he was holding his left side. "You shouldn't be down here. You're in the middle of active counter-agent integration. If you—" "Mara." His voice was quiet but complete. "Stop." She stopped. "I'm getting you out of here," he said. "Garrett has the key." "What about Cade?" "Cade is contained. His 2 men are in custody. He doesn't know yet that Sorrel—" A breath. "He doesn't know the evidence was found." "What happens when he does?" Garrett produced the key and opened the cell door, and Mara stepped out into the corridor, and the cold of the dungeon floor came up through her boots and found her bones. And she was aware, suddenly and comprehensively, of how exhausted she was. 12 days of careful vigilance and compound preparation, and watching and listening and building a picture of this conspiracy piece by piece, and now the floor of it had given way, and she was standing in the aftermath. "We moved to the council tonight," Kaelin said. "With Sorrel's evidence and yours. Haas is ready. He's been ready, I think, for longer than I realized. We need—" He stopped. She saw it before he could explain it, the sudden absence of color from his face, the way his left hand went to the wall for support with a precision that suggested his balance had become unreliable. "Kaelin." She was there immediately, hands on him, reading the signs with the speed of long practice. The counteragent integration was destabilizing under the physical stress of the descent and the accumulated dose interaction and the simple brutal fact that a body running 2 active poison protocols simultaneously did not have unlimited reserves. And she had known that, she had said 48 hours of rest in very explicit terms. And here he was on a dungeon staircase, and his pulse under her fingers was doing something she did not like at all. "Tell me your vision," she said. "Fine," he said. "Don't lie to me. Tell me your vision." A pause that told her everything. "Slightly dim at the edges." "Garrett, I need him back upstairs. Now. Flat, left side up. I can walk," Kaelin said. "You cannot walk," she said with the same precision she had used to silence soldiers and warlords and stubborn lords, with more ego than sense. Your cardiovascular system is currently running at approximately 60% capacity and declining because you decided that descending stairs was more important than the biological processes keeping you alive. You cannot walk. A silence. Garrett was already moving. I came to get you, Kalen said, and his voice had the quality of a man who understood he had made a bad decision and was still not sorry about it, which was the most specifically maddening version of the sentiment. I know, she said. I know you did. She pulled his arm over her shoulder, and Garrett took the other side, and between the two of them they began the process of getting the Alpha King of the Northern Reach back up the stairs he never should have come down. Next time, send Garrett. He wouldn't have come as fast, Kalen said. That is not a point in your favor right now. No, he agreed. Probably not. She had him upstairs and horizontal within 8 minutes and was running the emergency stabilization sequence with her hands and a speed she could only access in genuine crisis when the door of the chamber opened and Darius Cade walked in. He was not alone. 4 soldiers she didn't recognize, not fortress guards, not the silver and black livery of the Vire household. Something else. Something darker with a different crest that told her with terrible clarity that Cade had prepared for this contingency far better than any of them had anticipated. Outside soldiers. Paid loyalty, not pack loyalty, the kind that held as long as the coin was good. Garrett moved. He was very fast. Genuinely fast. Combat fast. The speed of a man whose body had been trained to move before his mind finished the instruction. He got between Cade's soldiers and the door, and he lasted approximately 30 seconds against 4, because 30 seconds was the amount of time a single man could hold a doorway against 4 before arithmetic made its inevitable argument. Cade stepped over Garrett's unconscious body with the clean efficiency of a man crossing a threshold he had been planning to cross for a long time. He looked at Mara beside the bed. He looked at Kalen, pale and still, and running on the last reserves of a body that had been through too much in too short a time. This, Cade said, was something that was not quite satisfaction but lived in that neighborhood, is the ending I was trying to avoid. You understand that. I tried to give you the quiet option. You tried to kill him, Mara said. Twice. I tried to transition the pack to leadership that would serve the North better than a man who lets sentiment cloud his strategy. His voice was completely level. This was the thing about Cade that was worst, not the fury or the ambition, but the absolute genuine conviction. He believed this, every word of it. He had constructed a world in which what he was doing was correct, and he had lived in it long enough that its walls were load-bearing. Kalen Vire is a good soldier. He is not a good king. He sees a woman with his child's eyes, and he stops being an alpha. He becomes a man, and men, in the position he holds, get their packs killed. He sees a person, Mara said. That's different from what you're describing. Sentiment, Cade said. Dressed up in better language. Kalen spoke from the bed. His voice was thin but present. Darius. Cade looked at him. Something moved in his face then. Not regret, but a shadow of what regret might have been in a different version of this moment. Don't, he said quietly. Don't make this a scene with speeches. You know why I've done this. You know me well enough to understand the reasoning, even if you can't agree with it. I know you, Kalen said. I've known you for 12 years, and I know that you are the smartest man in any room you walk into and the most genuinely committed person in this fortress. And you have spent 12 years being absolutely certain that you understand the North better than I do. A breath. And I know that certainty is going to cost you everything, because you have never in 12 years considered the possibility that you were wrong. Cade was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Mara, and the quiet version of him went away. And what came back was the administrative version, the man for whom problems required solutions. Chainer, he said to the soldiers. They moved. She moved faster. Not toward the door, not toward Cade, but to the bedside table where she had set her kit when she began the stabilization sequence. Her hands found the specific vial she needed before the soldiers reached her, and she turned with it held up between 2 fingers, and she looked at Cade directly. Crawlweed extract, she said. Full dose. Into the counteragent compound already in his bloodstream, With the residual night-wither interaction, this kills him within minutes. She held his eyes. You move another step, and I administer this. The room stopped. Cade looked at the vial. He looked at her face. He was reading her. She could feel him reading her, the same assessment he had run in her workroom, looking for the edge of the bluff. She was not bluffing. He could see that. She watched him see it, watched the calculation run in real time, and the thing he found was not what he expected to find in a mountain healer with a 4-year-old daughter and a quiet professional manor and 4 years of invisible, careful survival behind her. What he found was a woman who had already decided. Put it down, he said carefully. You don't want to do this. I don't, she agreed, but I will. Back your people out. Put Garrett's key on the table, and then you are going to walk out of this room and go somewhere I can see you while I stabilize my patient, and then this goes to the council with the evidence, and you make your case there like a grown man. You're bluffing. 12 days ago I chose to save the life of the man who destroyed my village, she said. Ask yourself what kind of person makes that choice. Then ask yourself if that person bluffs. The silence was the most complete silence she had experienced in her life. Not quiet. There was the fire. The distant sounds of the fortress, Garrett's shallow breathing from the floor. But complete, in the sense that everything unnecessary had been removed from it, and what was left was just the room and the decision and the two people making it. Cade took a step toward her. Mara, Kaelin said from the bed. His voice was barely audible now, the reserves finally spent. Don't. She looked at him, dark eyes, patient and certain even now, even at the absolute bottom of everything. Looking at her the way he had looked at her on the kitchen floor, with that strange, irreducible recognition. Trust me, he said. The vial was warm in her hand. She had about 30 seconds to make the choice that would determine what came next. She looked at Cade. She looked at Kaelin. And then she looked at the vial, and did the thing that no one in the room expected, including herself, the thing that her healer's mind had been building toward through 12 days of compound preparation and careful study, the thing that was either going to save them both or kill her. She broke the vial's seal, and she drank it. The effect was immediate. It always was, with crawlweed. That was part of its lethality. The speed with which it entered the bloodstream through the mucous membranes, the speed with which it began its work. She felt it as heat first, running down from her throat in a line that was almost elegant in its directness, and then as a cold that came behind the heat and was worse. Everyone in the room went absolutely still. What did you just do? Cade said, and the administrative calm was gone, replaced by something she had not heard from him before, genuine shock. Healer's filter, she said. Her voice was already changing, rougher, the compound finding the vocal cords on its way through. Ancient practice. You take the poison through a body that has the antigen naturally, and the body converts it. The converted compound passes through the skin. She pressed her hand against Kaelin's chest, over his heart. And it works as a counteragent for anything of the same base family that's already in the system. Sorrel was in the doorway. She hadn't heard him arrive, had no idea how long he'd been standing there with the evidence case in his arms and his face the color of old chalk. He stared at her. That will kill you, he said. If I don't have the antigen, yes, she said. The heat was moving through her in waves now, each wave carrying something that was either pain or the feeling of pain. She was no longer sure she could distinguish the two. If I do, how do you know if you have it? Sorrel said. She looked at the scar on her shoulder, the crescent moon old and silver-faded, the mark of a wolf claw and a herb knife, and a night 4 years ago when 2 people had cut each other in the dark and survived it. She pressed her hand harder against Kaelin's chest. I know, she said. The compound moved through her like a river finding its final channel, like something that had been looking for its destination and had, at considerable personal cost, found it. Kaelin's color changed. Slowly, incrementally, but she felt it under her palm, the pulse strengthening, the specific quality of a body that has been fighting something all at once losing the thing it was fighting, the counteragent completing what her body was now providing. The heat in her own chest reached its peak. She had time to register Cade's face, The complete and total failure of every certainty it had been built on, the face of a man whose calculation had simply not included this, before the world tilted on its axis and went sideways. The last thing she heard before the floor came up to meet her was Kalen's voice, restored, urgent, with a particular quality she had never heard from him before, and recognized only because it was the same sound she had been carrying in her own chest for 12 days. Mara. The cold stone of the dungeon floor was a long way below. She fell a very long way to reach it. She came back to consciousness the way a person surfaced from very deep water, slowly, against resistance, aware of the effort before she was aware of anything else. The first thing she registered was warmth, not the brutal heat of the crawlweed moving through her system. That was gone, or changed, or resolved into something that her body had finished its argument with. But the quiet, settled warmth of a fire and a hearth, and a blanket, and a room that had been deliberately prepared for someone who needed to be warm. The second thing she registered was that she was not on the dungeon floor anymore. The surface beneath her was a mattress. Her mattress, she realized, after another moment of slow orientation. The mattress in her quarters in the East residential wing, with the particular familiar topography of a surface she had slept on for 12 nights, and already knew in the wordless way the body mapped the places it rested. The third thing she registered was Lena's voice. "She moved," Lena said. Quietly, in the particular hushed register she used in spaces where quiet was being maintained for someone's benefit. Her fingers moved. "I see that." Sorrel's voice, from somewhere to her right. "Does that mean she's waking up?" "It means her body is deciding whether to wake up. Give it time." "I've given it time," Lena said, with the philosophical resignation of a small person who had been giving things time for what was, from her perspective, a very extended period. "I've been giving it time since yesterday." Yesterday. Mara opened her eyes, the ceiling of her quarters, the familiar crack in the plaster above the window. Morning light, real morning light, not the late gray light of early dawn, but the clear angled light of a sun that had been up for several hours already. "Mama." Lena was there immediately, climbing onto the edge of the bed with the precision of a child who had been waiting for exactly this moment and was executing its arrival with total focus. She did not throw herself forward the way another child might have. She settled herself carefully beside Mara's shoulder, one small hand finding Mara's, and looked at her face with the dark, serious eyes that saw everything. "Hi, baby," Mara said. Her voice came out rough, scraped, like something that had been through a fire and was still sorting out its edges. She cleared it. "Hi." "You scared me," Lena said. Her voice was completely even. This was worse, somehow, than if she'd cried. The steadiness of a 4-year-old who had sat beside her mother's unconscious body for an unknown number of hours and held herself together with both hands. "You fell down, and you were very cold." "I know. I'm sorry. You should have told someone you were going to do that." "It wasn't entirely planned," Mara said. Lena looked at her for a long moment, conducting the same comprehensive assessment she conducted on everyone, reading the eyes, the color, the quality of the breathing. Then, apparently satisfied with her findings, she tucked herself against Mara's shoulder and said nothing more. Just the warm, small weight of her, breathing steadily, Captain the Rabbit pressed between them. Sorrel materialized at her other side. He looked, she thought, like a man who had not slept and had done a great deal of thinking during the hours he was not sleeping, and the thinking had changed the shape of his face slightly. "Your vitals are stable," he said. "Heart rhythm is normal. The crawlweed metabolized. I've never seen it metabolize cleanly before. Frankly, I didn't know it could. I've only ever seen it treated post-ingestion, which is an entirely different—" He stopped himself. "Rebuilt." "You have the antigen." "Yes," she said. "The healer's filter isn't in any text I have access to." "It's not in most texts. It's oral tradition. Very old practice. It requires the specific antigen, and the antigen only occurs in—" She paused, looking at the ceiling. "In certain bloodlines. Old ones. Mountain families, primarily. My grandmother knew it. Her grandmother taught it to her." Sorrel was quiet for a moment. "It transferred to the alpha. Whatever the crawlweed had become by the time it passed through you, it neutralized everything in his system. Both compounds. Fully. His vitals this morning are better than they've been since the first poisoning. Another pause. Which is, medically speaking, remarkable. How is he? She asked. Resting. Genuinely resting this time, not performing rest while planning to descend dungeon staircases. Something crossed Sorel's face that was the medical equivalent of a grimace. He was not functional for several hours after the incident, not from the poison. He was... Sorel looked at his hands. He was not well when you fell. That's the most clinical way I can describe it. Mara said nothing. She looked at the ceiling. Cade is in the council chamber, Sorel said. Under guard. Haas convened an emergency session last night. He apparently had been compiling his own concerns about Cade for some months, and your evidence provided the formal foundation he needed. Garrett gave testimony. A pause. I gave testimony. She turned her head to look at him. Sorel met her eyes without flinching. He had the look of a man who had made a decision after a long time of not making one, and who was tired from the making but not sorry about it. I should have looked more carefully at the supply room inventories 2 months ago, he said. I saw the gaps. I chose to find explanations for them that didn't require me to accuse the Alpha's senior lieutenant. A breath. That was a choice based on convenience rather than evidence. I won't make it again. Sorel, she said, I know I was not welcoming when you arrived. I made it easy to be unwelcoming, she said. I came in with an edge. You had reasons for the edge. I always have reasons, she said. Reasons aren't the same as being easy to work with. She looked at him. We'll do better? He nodded once with the economy of a man for whom one firm nod was the complete expression of something he didn't have better words for. Then he checked her pulse, made a notation in the small journal he carried, and left her to the morning. She was on her feet by midday. Not because she was fully recovered. She was not. Her body had been through something significant, and it was registering that fact in clear and specific terms. But because lying in bed while things were happening felt like a choice she was no longer able to make. Lena walked beside her through the fortress corridors with the proprietary calm of a small person who had decided that what had happened yesterday was resolved and that forward motion was the appropriate response. She held Captain with one arm and Mara's hand with the other and greeted every person they passed with the same serene nod, the universal ambassador. The fortress felt different. She registered it in the way a healer registered changes in a patient's environment, the subtle shifts that individually meant little but in combination described a significant change in state. People stood differently in the corridors. The watch rotation was different. The cluster of minor lords who had been gathered near the Great Hall's entrance since her second day, always gathered, always talking, always falling quiet when she passed, were still gathered, but the quality of their quiet was different, less watchful, more settled. She found Garrett in the outer courtyard, overseeing a rotation change with the methodical efficiency she had come to recognize as his baseline mode of operating. He saw her and crossed to her with more urgency than his normal measured pace. You shouldn't be up, he said. I know. How is the council session? Going the way it needs to go, he said. Haas is thorough. He went through every piece of your evidence and Sorel's both in order, without editorial. Cade's outside soldiers were identified. They were hired through a third-party contact in the Eastern Territories, paid in private coin. The letter you found was authenticated against Cade's official correspondence by 2 separate scribes. He paused. It's complete, Mara. There's nothing missing from it. And Cade? Garrett's jaw set. Maintaining that everything he did was in service to the pack, that the Alpha's judgment was compromised, that the ends justified. He stopped. He's not wrong that he believed it. That's what makes it... He searched for the word. Tragic, Mara said. Garrett looked at her. Most people would say monstrous. Most people haven't sat in enough rooms with people doing terrible things for genuine reasons, she said. Both can be true. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said simply, The Alpha wants to see you. I know, she said. Tell me he's actually rested and not receiving council reports from a supine position. Garrett almost smiled. Almost. He ate, he slept. He is receiving council reports from a seated position, which in my estimation represents a compromised position we can live with. It's progress, Mara agreed. He was at the window again when she entered. She was starting to understand that this was where he went when he was thinking. Not the desk, not the chair, but the window with the mountain in it. The enormous, indifferent northern face that pressed against the glass on clear days and disappeared into weather on bad ones. She wondered if the mountain meant something specific to him, or if it was simply the largest fixed point available, the thing that didn't move when everything else did. He turned when he heard her. The color had come back to his face. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Enough that he looked like himself, rather than the gray echo of himself she had been managing for 2 weeks. His eyes did the dark water thing, and she was tired enough and post-crisis enough that she had stopped being able to maintain the professional distance from it. "You should still be in bed," he said. "So should you," she said. "We're both making choices." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room in 4 steps and put his hands on her face. It was not a romantic gesture, or it was not only a romantic gesture. It was the specific gesture of a person who needed to confirm with their hands what their eyes were telling them, the way people touched walls in the dark to make sure they were real. His hands were warm and slightly rough from the training yard calluses, and they framed her face with a care that was almost painful in its precision. "You drank it," he said. "Yes." "You didn't tell me you were going to do that." "There wasn't time for a discussion." "You could have died." "I didn't." Mara. Her name, from him, in that register, stripped of all the careful distance they'd been maintaining, just the sound of it, direct and personal and entirely unguarded. "I need you to understand that watching you fall was—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I have been in combat. I have been in situations of active threat for the better part of my adult life. I know what fear in a crisis feels like, and I know how to manage it. What I experienced when you hit that floor was not that." She looked at him. At the dark water of his eyes at this distance, which was close enough that she could see it wasn't simply dark. It was specific, layered, the way deep things were when you got close enough to see into them, rather than simply at them. "You were supposed to send Garrett," she said. "I know. You came down those stairs when your body was at 60% capacity and your counteragent integration was incomplete. I know that too. Why?" He held her face in his hands and looked at her with the expression of a man who has a great many words available and has selected none of them because none of them are quite large enough for what they're intended to contain. "You know why?" he said. She did. She had known for some time, in the specific way a person knew things they had been carefully not looking at directly. She had the full accounting of it, clear and comprehensive, sitting in the part of her mind she had designated for things she was not ready to act on. She was not sure that designation still held. "The council session," she said. "What happens when it concludes?" "A formal verdict," he said. "Probably exile. Cade has supporters in the Eastern Territories who would use a more extreme outcome as political leverage. Haas recommends it. I agree." He paused. "And then a full review of the household structure and the guard rotation and the internal appointment process, because a conspiracy of that duration inside a closed household means there are gaps in how we verify loyalty that I should have found years ago. That will take time." "Yes, and during that time the pack is without its full leadership function. Because you are still in physical recovery, and the senior lieutenant position is vacant, and the council has just been through a formal crisis proceeding." He looked at her. "Yes." "You need a healer who knows the fortress," she said, "and the people in it, and the compounds in the infirmary and the gaps in the supply records, and which lords have knee problems, and which guards have infected hand wounds, and which people in this fortress have been watching Cade for months, and thinking something was wrong, and never had anyone to tell." "I need you," he said, simply. "That's what I need." She looked at him for a long moment. At this man who had waved at her daughter across a training yard and descended dungeon stairs on 60% capacity and was currently holding her face in his hands with an honesty that had no performance in it anywhere. She thought about 4 years of carefully invisible survival. She thought about the cottage on the mountain's edge, and the patched boot, and the herb bundles drying over the hearth, and the life she had built specifically to be small enough to be safe. She thought about the fact that she had run from the right direction once before, 4 years ago, in a burning field, and had been running in the same direction ever since. "Put your hands down," she said. "You're still in recovery, and you're going to make your left shoulder ache." He put his hands down. He was almost smiling. It was, she thought, a devastating thing. That almost smile, specific and careful and entirely genuine. "Stay," he said. She looked at him. "Ask me again once the council session is finished and Cade is on his way to the Eastern Territories, and Lena has had a good night of sleep that isn't interrupted by fortress emergency bells." "That's not a no," he said. "Correct," she said. "It's not." The council session concluded at 4 in the afternoon in the main hall of Ashvale Fortress, with the particular solemn formality of a proceeding that everyone present understood would be referenced for a long time afterward. Mara stood at the back of the hall with Lina, who had been informed that this was an important adult meeting and had accordingly brought Captain and her full attention, and watched the council render its verdict. Haas read it. His voice was the voice of a practical man who had concluded, through the weight of specific evidence and the experience of a long career spent learning the difference between loyalty and its performance, that what had been done in this hall could not be undone, and that what came next needed to be built on a different foundation. Darius Cade stood in the center of the hall and heard his exile pronounced with the stillness of a man who had already calculated this outcome and was not going to give anyone the satisfaction of his surprise. He looked, Mara thought, exactly like what he was. A very intelligent person who had been absolutely certain of his own correctness and was standing in the specific wreckage that certainty produced when it stopped being answerable to anyone else. He looked across the hall at one point and found her. His eyes ran over her face with the same quality of assessment they'd always carried, but different now. Not calculating a response or measuring a threat, just reading, just seeing. She met his gaze steadily. "You were unexpected," he said. Not loudly. She was close enough to hear it, barely. "I know," she said. Something in his face shifted briefly. Not acknowledgement exactly, the shadow of it. "He'll be better for it," he said, "if he doesn't lose himself in it." "He won't," she said. "That's not who he is." Cade looked at her for one more moment. Then the guards moved him toward the door, and the hall's noise rose around his departure, and he was gone. She found Kalen in the corridor outside the hall after the formal proceedings dispersed. He was speaking with Haas, quietly, with the focused intensity of two men running through the immediate practical requirements of a situation that had generated a significant list of them, and she stood a few feet away and waited, because she was good at waiting, and because she had Lena's hand, and Lena was content to observe the dispersing council members with the same scientific attention she brought to the herb pots. Haas finished. He turned, saw Mara, and did something she hadn't entirely expected. He bowed. Not a deep formal bow, but a sincere one. The specific acknowledgement of a practical man who had decided that what he was acknowledging deserved a physical expression. "Mara Thorne," he said, "the council is grateful." "The council should double-check its infirmary supply records going forward," she said, "and put a sign-in requirement on the storage room. I'll help design the protocol." Haas blinked. Then he almost laughed, not with surprise, but with the particular delight of a person who had encountered exactly the kind of response he'd hoped for and hadn't been sure he'd get. "Yes," he said, "I imagine you will." He moved off. Kalen looked at her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Functional," she said. "Ask me again tomorrow when the residual effects have finished clearing." "I'm asking now." She looked at him. At the color that had come back to his face, and the steadiness in his bearing and the dark water of his eyes that was doing, she had decided precisely what it had always been doing, and she was done pretending she hadn't noticed. "Better than I've felt in 4 years, she said. "Don't make anything of that." "I'm making everything of it," he said. Lena looked up at him. She had been patient, impressively, comprehensively patient, through an entire afternoon of adult proceedings, and she had apparently decided that patience had run its natural course and direct engagement was now appropriate. "Hello," she said. Kalen looked down at her. The same thing that had happened across the training yard happened again. The careful performance of composure falling away and leaving something underneath it that was just a man looking at a small girl with dark eyes and a determined jaw and feeling the specific weight of what she was. "Hello," he said. His voice was different, softer, with a quality she hadn't heard from him in any register. Not the warmth he had for her, not the precision he had for the council, but something new, something finding its shape for the first time. "I don't think we've been properly introduced." Lena considered him. "I know who you are," she said. "You're the sad man from the kitchen." "I was sad then," he said. "I'm less sad now." "I know," Lena said, with the satisfaction of someone whose diagnosis has been confirmed. "Your eyes are better." She looked at him for another moment, conducting her assessment. "Do you know how to play Stackstone?" No," he said. "Mama taught me. I can teach you." She looked between them. "It's a good game. You can play it inside when the mountain weather is bad." Kaelin looked at Mara. She looked at him. The thing that had no adequate sentence for it was happening in the corridor of Ashvale Fortress at 4 in the afternoon after a council session, with the fire going in the great hall sconces and the mountain pressing its cold, patient face against the northern windows. "I'd like that," Kaelin said. To Lena. Entirely, genuinely, to Lena. Lena nodded, satisfied. "Okay, but not tonight because Mama needs to rest, and also I am hungry." "Both of those are reasonable requirements," Kaelin said. "I know," Lena said, and walked on down the corridor toward the east wing with the purposeful stride of a small person with a clear agenda, captain tucked under her arm, leaving Mara and Kaelin standing in the corridor with the particular aftermath of a 4-year-old's comprehensive social management settling around them. The memories came back fully that night, not in pieces, not in drips, all at once. The way the crawlweed had moved through her, fast and definitive, filling in the spaces that had been missing for 4 years with the specific clarity of something that the body had been holding in suspension, waiting for the precise biological moment to release it. She was sitting at her workroom bench, Lena asleep in the next room, the fortress quiet around her, and it came. The full night of Caldmere. She had known the outlines, the fire, the running, the silver wolf, the song, the herb knife in the dark. What she had not had was the center of it, the 30 seconds that she had apparently lost to shock or adrenaline or the specific mercy of a mind that protects itself from what it cannot process at speed. He had come back to himself. That was what she had lost. The song, 2 lines of her grandmother's melody, sung into the chaos by a healer's instinct, had worked, and the silver wolf had stilled, and in the stillness she had seen for one moment what was underneath it. The man. The dark eyes, disoriented, present, looking at her across the burning field with an expression of someone emerging from a place they didn't know how to describe and finding a fixed point to orient by. He had looked at her, and she had looked back. And then the chaos had returned and she had run, and he had lost her in the dark, and she had spent 4 years building a small, invisible life around the thing she had not been able to look at directly, which was this: that the worst night of her life had also contained a moment that was something else entirely. A moment between 2 people who had both just survived something enormous and had found each other in the surviving of it, briefly, in the dark, before the world pulled them in opposite directions. The scar on her shoulder was warm. She had never noticed that before, or had not let herself notice. But it was warm, the way scar tissue sometimes was when the nerves around it were active, and she put her hand over it and sat at the workroom bench in the quiet fortress and held the weight of 4 years of running against the weight of what she now completely understood. She had run from a fixed point. She had spent 4 years running from the thing she had used to orient by in the worst night of her life. Because in the aftermath of the worst night of her life, the 2 things had been inseparable, and she had not been able to hold them both without the grief destroying the other. She was still holding it. It was still complicated. It would probably be complicated for a long time, but she was no longer running. She went to him. It was late. The fortress was fully quiet, the watch rotation at its minimum, the corridors empty in the way they were only in the deepest part of the night. She knocked on his study door because knocking was a choice she had been making more consciously since arriving here and intended to keep making. "It's open," he said. He was at his desk, actually working, not performing rest, which she had expected and which was still going to earn him a medical opinion in the morning. Papers. The restructuring work of a household that had just lost its senior lieutenant and needed to rebuild its operational structure from the inside out. The work of an alpha who had almost died twice and was already thinking about what came next. He looked up when she entered. He read her face. He was very fast at reading her face, she had noticed, faster than anyone she had ever known, and set down his pen. "The memories," he said. Not a question. "All of them," she said. "Tonight. I think the filter, the biological process of it, I think it released whatever the block was." He was very still. "What did you find?" She sat across from him at the desk, the same table where she had laid out her notes and he had read them and they had built the picture of Cade's conspiracy together in the midnight quiet. She folded her hands on its surface and looked at him. "You saw me," she said. "After the song, when you came back to yourself. You looked at me and I looked at you." "Yes," he said quietly. "I couldn't remember that. For 4 years. I thought I'd run without ever seeing your face, I thought the night was only smoke and running, and every time I tried to understand the scar I ran into the same wall, because I couldn't remember the center of it. I remembered," he said. "That's the part that never left me. Every other piece of that night I've spent 4 years trying not to look at. But that part, a second, maybe 2, across a burning field, I've remembered every detail of it." "Why?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. The fire in the study hearth had burned low, and in the low light his face had the particular quality of something stripped of all its formal layers, just the man underneath, which was, she had known for a while, had been not looking at it directly for a while, a great deal. "Because it was the first time in my entire life," he said, "that I had completely lost myself and been found again by someone else." He held her gaze. "Do you understand what that means for a wolf? For an alpha? Losing the shift it's the most private terror there is, and you found me in it. A woman I didn't know, in a burning field, with a grandmother's song and a herb knife." He paused. "I spent 2 years looking for you because I needed to understand how someone I'd never met could be that specific piece of the world to me. I never let myself think beyond the finding, but I think I knew, from the moment I saw your face in that kitchen." Mara sat with this. It had a considerable weight, and she gave it the time it required, the way she gave everything significant the time it required. "I have a daughter," she said. "I know. She is my first, last, and complete priority. Every decision I make goes through her." "As it should," he said. "I would expect nothing else. And I am a healer. That is not a role I perform in between other things. It is what I am." "I know that too. And I am not—" She paused, choosing the words with the care she gave to compound preparation to the precise combination that produced the right result. "I am not easy. I have 4 years of mountain survival and a great deal of hard-won wariness built into how I move through the world, and that is not going to dissolve because of a good outcome in a council chamber. I'm not asking for dissolution," he said. "I'm asking for a beginning." She looked at him. "Day by day," he said. "Your terms. Your pace. I'm not going to declare anything or claim anything or issue any announcements. I'm going to learn Stackstone from your daughter and continue not moving my left shoulder against your direct medical instruction and try every day to be someone who deserves the two of you. That's all I'm asking to be allowed to do." The fire crackled. The mountain pressed its dark, patient face against the study window. "That's a more specific answer than I expected," she said. "I've been thinking about it," he said, "for approximately 12 days. Something in her chest did the thing it had been doing since the training yard, the warm, complicated private thing she had been filing under, not yet for as long as she could maintain the filing system. She let it be there. She stopped filing it. "I'll stay," she said, "through the winter at minimum, until the household restructuring is stable and Sorel's protocols are updated and the supply room has a proper sign-in requirement." She looked at him steadily. "And then we'll see." "Through the winter," he said, "and then we'll see." He looked at her with the expression that was not quite the almost smile but lived in its neighborhood, something warmer, more complete, The expression of a man who had asked for a beginning and been given one and understood the full value of what that was. "I'll take it," he said. Done. She was halfway to the door when she heard it. It started low, so low she felt it in her sternum before she registered it as sound, a vibration that moved through the stone walls and the floor and the air of the study like something the building had been waiting to release. She had heard it described before, in the way that people describe things they had encountered and needed to give language to. The alpha call. The sound that carried across a pack's territory on a frequency below ordinary hearing that found every loyal wolf in its range and pulled them toward it like a tide. She had not expected to feel it. She was not pack. She had never been pack. She had spent her entire adult life outside the formal structure of any wolf hierarchy, a solitary healer who moved between communities and belonged to none of them. But she felt it, in the scar on her shoulder, in the particular warmth that had been there since the filter, in some deeper register of herself that had no clinical name she had yet assigned to it. She turned. Kalen was still at his desk. He hadn't moved, hadn't shifted. But his eyes were different. The dark water had a different quality now, something older and more fundamental running underneath it, the part of him that was not the careful diplomat or the precise strategist, but the thing he'd been born carrying, that had expressed itself that night in the burning field in a way that had cost them both something they'd spent 4 years trying to account for. "Was that?" she started. "Not intentional," he said. His voice was careful. "I don't—" He stopped. "That hasn't happened involuntarily since Caldmere." She looked at him, at the scar above his collar, silver in the firelight. She looked at the door, the fortress corridors beyond it, where, faintly, distantly, she could hear the sound of movement, boots on stone, more than one pair heading this way with purpose. "Loyal wolves," she said. "Apparently," he said, and the careful voice had something underneath it that was, she decided, the specific sound of a man who was surprised by himself and was not sorry about it. The first boots reached the corridor outside. Garrett's knock, 3 clean strikes, his specific pattern, she had learned it by now, landed on the study door. "Alpha said," he said through the door. The West Wing guard rotation just, "Sir, we have 12 men out here who heard the call and came running. I don't know what you need me to do with them." Kalen looked at Mara. She looked at him. "Tell them to stand down," she said. "He's all right." A pause from the corridor. "Mara?" Garrett's voice recalibrated. "He's all right," she said again. "Thank you, Garrett. Stand them down." "Yes, ma'am," Garrett said, and she heard the particular quality of that "yes, ma'am," the one she recognized now as the Garrett version of the almost smile. And then his footsteps moving down the corridor, and his voice in the quiet darkness delivering the stand down in steady, certain terms. She looked at Kalen one more time. The fire was low, the mountain was still. 12 loyal wolves stood down in the corridor outside because the healer who had saved their alpha twice had told them he was all right, and they had listened, and that was something that meant something. "Go to sleep," she said. "You have a restructuring agenda to run tomorrow, and you're still in recovery, and if I come back in the morning and your color is wrong again, I'm going to confiscate your correspondence until midwinter." "Understood," he said. The almost smile, full and present, not quite hidden. She walked out into the corridor. 12 soldiers stood in various states of urgency and readiness, and they all looked at her when she emerged. Not with suspicion, not with the careful watchfulness of the first days, but with the straightforward regard of people who had updated their position on something and were not going to spend time being awkward about it. "Good night," she said to the corridor at large. "Good night, ma'am," several of them said, in the staggered, overlapping way of people who had not coordinated the response but had arrived at it independently, which was somehow better. She walked back to the East Residential Wing. She checked on Lena, small and certain in her sleep, captain tucked under one arm, her small commander face relaxed into something younger and softer in the way that sleeping faces always were. She stood in the doorway and looked at her daughter for a long moment, the way she had stood in doorways for 4 years looking at the most important thing in her world and feeling the particular weight of being solely responsible for its safety. Not soul, she thought. Not anymore. She was not ready to define what that meant yet. She had, as she'd told Kaylin, a winter to work with, a beginning, day by day. The specific ordinary work of learning whether a person was who they appeared to be in the moments that mattered, the kind of work that could not be rushed and should not be, and that she was, for the first time in 4 years, willing to do. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed. The scar on her shoulder was warm, and the fortress was quiet, and somewhere outside the northern windows, the mountain stood in its patient dark and said nothing, the way it always did. She slept. For the first time since arriving at Ashvale Fortress, she slept without keeping one part of herself awake and listening. The night held. Winter came to the Ashvale Mountains the way it always did. Without announcement, without negotiation, simply arriving one morning as an accomplished fact. The first snow fell on a Tuesday, which Mara noted with the private amusement of someone who had made a significant life decision on a Tuesday and had since developed a mild superstition about the day. She was in the infirmary when it started. Not her preparation room, the infirmary proper, the large main treatment space that Sorrel had run alone for 12 years, and that they now ran together, in the specific collaborative mode of two people who had begun from opposition and arrived at something more honest through the pressure of circumstances neither had chosen. Sorrel had turned out to be, beneath the professional territory and the white-bearded authority, a genuinely rigorous mind with a decent instinct and a capacity for updating his position that she had come to respect. He had reorganized the supply room protocols himself, without being asked a second time, and had presented her with a complete revised inventory system on a Monday morning with the manner of a man delivering work he was genuinely proud of. She had told him it was excellent. It was. She had suggested 3 additions. He had incorporated all 3 and added 2 more of his own. They had not discussed the first week. They didn't need to. She was restocking the wound treatment cabinet. The guard rotation had produced 3 minor injuries over the previous week, none serious, all managed well. The kind of ordinary, ongoing maintenance work that constituted most of what healing actually was. The unglamorous majority that existed between the emergencies. When she heard Lena in the corridor. Not distressed, she knew immediately, with the particular calibration of 4 years of active listening, that Lena was not distressed. The voice was the bright exploratory one. The register Lena used when something had caught her complete attention, and she was interrogating it with the focused joy of a small person for whom the world remained genuinely surprising. It's falling up first, Lena was saying, and then sideways, and then down. How does it decide? It doesn't decide. Kaylin's voice, patient, with the specific quality she had come to recognize as the one he used exclusively with Lena. Stripped of all register, all authority, just a person talking to another person who happened to be 4.5 and had very exacting questions about meteorology. Wind moves it. The snow goes wherever the wind takes it. But the wind can't decide either, Lena said. So nobody decides. A pause. The mountain decides, Kaylin said. In a manner of speaking, the mountain's shape determines how the wind moves, and the wind determines where the snow falls. Lena considered this with the gravity it apparently merited. So the mountain is in charge. Of the snow, yes. Mama says the mountain doesn't talk, Lena said, but it has opinions. Your mother, Kaylin said, and Mara, 2 feet from the open doorway, could hear the precise quality of what was in his voice when he said it, is usually right about these things. She stayed at the cabinet. She finished restocking the wound treatment shelf with the unhurried attention of a person who was absolutely not listening to the conversation in the corridor. She was listening to every word of it. The 6 weeks since the council session had been, she searched for the word and arrived at constructive, which was accurate if underweight. The household restructuring had proceeded under Kaylin's direction with the focused efficiency of a man who understood that empty structures invited bad weather, and that the gap Cade's removal had left needed to be filled carefully and correctly rather than quickly. 3 new senior appointments. A revised guard rotation with a double verification system for access to restricted areas. A formal review of all existing supply contracts and outside engagements, conducted by Haas and 2 other council members, which had turned up 2 additional small irregularities that Cade had apparently been running as supplementary operations and which were now closed. The fortress felt different. She had been trying to describe it precisely to herself for several weeks, and had finally arrived at, it breathed more evenly. Like a patient who had been running a low fever for so long that the fever had become the baseline, and whose body had forgotten what normal temperature felt like until the fever broke, and the difference was suddenly and comprehensively apparent. People stood differently. They talked differently. They laughed in the corridors in the uncalculated way of people who were not measuring the distance to the nearest authority before allowing themselves to respond to something. The watchguards greeted her by name now. Not uniformly, not all of them, but enough of them that it had stopped feeling like an exception and started feeling like a fact. Lena had become, somehow, the unofficial ambassador of the entire residential wing. This had not been planned by anyone, and could not have been planned. It was simply the natural consequence of a 4-year-old with no social agenda moving freely through a fortress full of adults who had spent years performing careful watchfulness and discovering in Lena's company that they had temporarily forgotten how to stop. She had taught Stackstone to Garrett, who had proven surprisingly competitive. She had informed Lord Haas on 3 separate occasions that he still wasn't sleeping enough, and had delivered him valerian compound each time with the manner of a physician who had accepted that some patients required consistent management. She had adopted the elderly kitchen maid Mara had treated in the first week, a woman named Bet, 67 years old, with joint damage and a sense of dry humor that matched Lena's own, as a preferred companion for afternoon hours when Mara was in the infirmary and Kaylin was in the council rooms. Kaylin, for his part, was doing exactly what he had said he would do, day by day. No declarations, no claims. He learned Stackstone, badly at first, then with improving competence, and Lena's running commentary on his strategic errors was delivered with the affectionate precision of a coach who had decided her student had potential. He brought Mara mountain tea in the mornings, without announcement, setting it on the corner of the infirmary workbench when she was occupied and never drawing attention to it. He asked her questions, real questions, not the performing interest variety, but the questions of a person who wanted to understand specifically how she thought about things, what her reasoning was, where her knowledge had come from, what she had seen in 12 years of healing in difficult places. She answered them. She asked her own. It was a slow construction, this thing between them, built the way good things were built in conditions that required care. Carefully, with attention to the foundation, without rushing the joints. She was not sorry about the pace. The pace was right. It matched the weight of what it was carrying. The letter arrived on the 43rd day of winter, which was a Wednesday, and it arrived from the Eastern Territories with a seal she did not recognize and an address in handwriting that was not Cade's but had been written, the phrasing of the content made clear, on his behalf. She found it on Kaylin's desk when she came for the morning consultation. Open, already read, set in the precise center of the desk in the way he arranged things that required a decision. He was standing at the window. She had expected that. She picked up the letter and read it. It was from Lord Vasher Crane, Eastern Territory, a man who controlled 2 of the 3 major trade routes through the lower mountain pass, and who had, the letter's tone made clear, been one of Cade's primary political backers and financial supporters for the better part of the conspiracy's duration. The letter was carefully worded, a formal political communication, the kind that an experienced lord wrote when he needed to communicate a threat without using the vocabulary of threats. And its content was this: Cade's exile was an injustice. The Eastern Territories did not recognize the Council's verdict, and the question of the Alpha's fitness to lead the North, given the recent evidence of his, and here the letter used the word susceptibility, which was doing a great deal of work for a small word, to external influences of uncertain origin and unclear intent, was one that the Eastern Lords felt required a formal convening. She set the letter down. "How many lords does Crane speak for?" she asked. "Formally, 3. Informally, perhaps 6. Kaylin turned from the window. The Eastern Alliance was Cade's architecture. He built it over 5 years, quietly, through the same kind of gradual positioning he used for everything else. His voice was even. "I knew the alliance existed. I didn't know its depth. And a formal convening of lords means a challenge to Alpha authority," he said. "Formal, council recognized, requiring a response." He looked at her. "It's within the law. It's Cade's last move made from exile. I have to respond to it, or the non-response becomes its own kind of statement." She sat down. She thought about this with the same clear-headed, systematic attention she brought to compound interactions, tracing the chain, identifying the variables, following each possible pathway to its outcome. When? She asked. They'll expect a response within the month. The convening itself would be at midwinter if they move at normal political pace. That's 3 weeks. Yes. And the susceptibility to external influences, she said, quoting the letter's phrasing with its full weight, is me. He did not answer immediately, which was an answer. They're going to argue that I'm a destabilizing element, she said, an unverified outside person with no house name and no formal position, and a child of uncertain parentage who arrived in the middle of a conspiracy and… She stopped, built it more carefully. They're going to argue that Cade was right. Not about the method, but about the diagnosis. That you've let someone in who has compromised your judgment. That the alpha of the Northern Reach is making decisions with his instincts rather than his strategy. She looked at him steadily. And they're not entirely wrong about the dynamic, even if they're wrong about the conclusion. They're wrong about the conclusion, he said. But you're going to have to prove it, she said, in front of every Eastern lord who signed on to Crane's letter, and the council, and… She stopped again. Kaelin, if this goes badly, it won't. You don't know that. No, he said, I don't, but I know what I'm going to say. He moved from the window to the desk, and he stood across from her the way he had stood in the study on her second day, with his hands open on the surface, not reaching, not demanding, just present and clear and completely certain in the way he was certain about a limited number of things. And I know that whatever the outcome, I'm not going to distance myself from you or Lena as a political calculation. I want that stated now cleanly before the situation applies any pressure to it. That's exactly the kind of statement, she said carefully, that might make this harder for you. I know. I could leave, she said, temporarily, until after the convening. Remove the variable… No. Not heated, just final. I am done removing variables because their presence makes my political situation complicated. That's Cade's way of thinking, and it produces Cade's results. He held her gaze. You are not a variable. You are a person. Lena is a person, and the Eastern Lords can hold their convening and make their arguments, and I will make mine. She looked at him for a long moment. The morning light came through the study window and landed on the desk between them, and outside the window the snow was doing what Lena had described, falling up first, and then sideways, and then down, the mountain deciding where it went. All right, she said. Then we prepare. Well, the preparation took 3 weeks, and it was the most comprehensive and specific kind of preparation Mara had ever been part of, which was saying something because she had prepared for a great many things in her life, most of them urgent and several of them genuinely life-threatening. This was different. This was the preparation of a case, not medical, not biological, but the kind of case that a person made to a room full of people who had already decided what they thought and needed to be given a reason to think differently. It required a different set of tools than the ones she normally worked with, and it required more than anything the one thing she had been most carefully managing for the past 6 weeks. The truth. All of it. She sat with Kaelin in the study on the night before the convening, and they went through it from the beginning. Not reconstructing for the first time. They both knew it by now, had turned it over between them in the careful, incremental way of two people building shared understanding of something complicated, but ordering it, sequencing it, making it presentable to a room that was going to be looking for the version that supported its predetermined conclusion and needed to be shown a different version instead. Caldmere, he said. They'll use Caldmere. Yes. They'll say that a healer whose village was destroyed by the Alpha's pack is a motivated actor, that everything you've done here, treating the poisoning, the filter, the evidence, was designed to put you in a position of influence. And what do you say to that? He was quiet for a moment. I say that a woman who was motivated to harm me had 3 separate opportunities to do it and chose 3 times to save my life instead. He paused. And I say that the scar on her shoulder and the scar on mine are not coincidences, and the council already knows it, and the Eastern Lords will know it by the end of the first hour. They'll ask about Lena, she said. Yes. She looked at the fire, at the low, steady flame of a hearth that had been burning for 6 weeks in the rooms she had been given, and which had, somewhere in those 6 weeks, stopped feeling like rooms she had been given and started feeling like rooms she lived in. "What are you going to say?" she asked. Not because she didn't know, because she needed to hear him say it to the fire, to the quiet room, before he said it to a hall full of people who were looking for a reason not to believe it. "I'm going to say that she's mine," he said, quietly, completely. "I'm going to say that I didn't know for 4 years because I was looking in the wrong places, and that when I found her mother again, I understood what I had been looking for, and that the child who revealed the truth by pointing at a scar in a kitchen on a stormy night is the Alpha's daughter, and I will not qualify that or soften it or frame it as a possibility. It's a fact. I'm stating it as one." Mara looked at him. "Does Lena know?" he asked. "She knows you're important," Mara said. "She has since the kitchen. Children know things before we think they're ready to know them." "I'd like to tell her," he said. "Before the convening, properly. Whatever that looks like. I want her to hear it from me, not from a room full of lords arguing about it." Mara looked at the fire for a long time. The warmth of it was real and present, and the room was quiet, and outside the northern window the Ashvale Mountain stood in its enormous, patient dark. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "Before breakfast, the 3 of us." He looked at her, the not-quite smile, full this time. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him. "Don't thank me yet. She's going to have opinions about it, and she is going to express them with complete honesty." "I'm counting on it," he said. They told Lena in the small courtyard where the herb pots lived, because Lena had decided some weeks ago that the herb pots were her domain and that most important conversations should happen in proximity to things that were growing. The snow had been cleared from the stones, and the pots were covered with cloth against the cold, and Lena sat on the low stone bench in her winter coat with Captain on her lap and looked between them with the dark, serious eyes that missed nothing. Kaelin told her. He sat across from her on the bench, and he told her clearly and plainly, and without the softening adults used when they thought truth required cushioning, because he had spent enough time with Lena to understand that she was not the kind of person who needed truth cushioned. She was the kind of person who needed it straight, delivered with full respect for her ability to receive it. Lena listened. She did not interrupt. She looked at his face through the whole of it with the comprehensive attention she gave to everything that mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Mara. "Did you know?" she asked. "I suspected," Mara said carefully. "For a long time, I wasn't certain. But now you're certain." "Yes." Lena looked at Kaelin again. She turned Captain over in her hands. The small worn rabbit who had been through 4 years of mountain winters and fortress corridors and one extremely dramatic dungeon incident. And she looked at the man across from her with the focused assessment of a small person taking a measurement. "Are you going to live with us?" she asked. "If you'll allow it," he said. "Yes." "You'll have to learn to make the herb tea properly," she said. "Mama's way. You've been making it wrong." A silence. "I didn't know I'd been making it. Every morning. You put too much in. It comes out bitter." She said this with the matter-of-fact delivery of a person providing actionable feedback. "I'll show you the right amount." Kaelin looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face that she had not seen before and did not have a name for. Something that was perhaps what a man looked like when he received, from a 4.5-year-old, the most significant forgiveness of his life, delivered in the form of tea-making instructions. "I'd like that," he said. Lena nodded. She slid off the bench and picked up Captain. "Okay," she said. "I'm hungry. Can we have breakfast now?" The convening was held in the Great Hall on the 46th day of winter. 11 lords attended in person. 7 more sent formal representatives. The council was present in full for the first time since the Cade proceeding, which had the particular gravity of a body that had been through a formal crisis and was now being asked to manage its aftermath in a room full of people who wanted a different outcome. Crane led the Eastern argument. He was a careful speaker, not brilliant, but disciplined, the kind of orator who built a case the way a contractor built a wall, brick by careful brick, each piece placed before the next was added. He used the word susceptibility 4 times in the first 20 minutes. He used external influence 9 times. He built his version of events with the specific confidence of a man who had been rehearsing it for 6 weeks and believed in the version he had built. Mara sat in the hall. She had not been invited to sit. She had simply taken a chair at the edge of the council table with the manner of a person for whom the legitimacy of her presence was not a question she was entertaining, and no one had asked her to move, which she took as the general tenor of where things stood. Lena was with Bet. Mara had been specific about that. Lena would not be in this hall. Whatever happened here, Lena would not be present to watch it happen. Kaylin listened to Crane's full argument without interruption. She had watched him do this in smaller contexts over the past 6 weeks. The specific, deliberate patience of a man who believed that giving an argument its full hearing was not courtesy, but strategy. That a person who interrupted was a person who hadn't listened, and a person who hadn't listened was a person who would be surprised when the argument they dismissed landed on someone else's ears. He waited until Crane had completed every point, taken the water that was offered, and settled back in his chair with the manner of a man who believed he had made his case. Then Kaylin stood. She had seen him in the council room. She had seen him in the study, in the training yard, in the corridor outside the library at midnight. She had seen him on a kitchen floor bleeding, and she had seen him on a dungeon staircase at 60% capacity. And she had seen him look at her daughter across a training yard and wave. She had not seen him here, in the full formal weight of what he was. It was not performance. That was the thing. Every other person who had spoken in this hall was performing to some degree, performing authority, performing certainty, performing the version of themselves that the argument required. Kaylin stood and spoke from the same place he spoke from in the quiet of the study at night, with the same fundamental quality of a person who was saying what they actually meant and had decided that was the only register worth using. He began with Caldmere. He did not defend it. He did not frame it, qualify it, or provide political context that might soften the outline. He stated it as what it was, a catastrophic failure of leadership control that had destroyed a village and sent a healer and her infant daughter into 4 years of hiding in the mountains, and for which he would carry responsibility for the rest of his life and had no interest in asking to be absolved of. The hall was very quiet. He stated what the healer had done. 3 times. A song in a burning field that had pulled him back from losing himself completely. A treatment in a kitchen that had interrupted a poisoning that should have been fatal. A healer's filter, performed alone, that had converted a lethal compound through her own body to save his life at considerable personal risk. "This is not the behavior," he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the hall without effort, without force, with the simple physics of a person who had something true to say and the room had gone quiet enough to let them say it. Of a person whose objective is harm. This is the behavior of a person who chose, in 3 separate moments, the harder option. The option that cost her something. The option that required her to extend trust to someone who had not earned it, and had in fact actively damaged her life. He looked at Crane. Lord Crane's argument asked this council to believe that what I should be concerned about is the presence of a woman who has saved my life 3 times. It asks you to conclude that the danger to this pack is the healer, and not the man who purchased a rare poison and introduced it into my morning drink. He paused. I find the ordering of that concern difficult to follow. Haas made a sound. She had come to know Haas's sounds. This one was the specific sound of a practically minded man encountering an argument he found impeccable and expressing this in the most economical way available to him. There is also the matter of the child, Kaylin said. The hall went quieter, which she had not thought possible. Lena Thorne is 4 years old. She has dark eyes and a jaw that the council's physician can attest bears a specific resemblance to my own, as he informed me approximately 48 hours after her arrival in this fortress. He looked at Sorrel, who sat at the council table with the bearing of a man who had testified twice in the past month and had found the process clarifying. She is my daughter. That is not an allegation or a possibility. It is a fact, and I am stating it as one, and if Lord Crane's alliance requires that I qualify it in order to maintain their political engagement, then Lord Crane's alliance and I have arrived at an impasse. Crane leaned forward. Alpha. The question is not the child's parentage. The question is whether this woman, whose village was destroyed by your pack, whose presence here has coincided with two separate assassination attempts. The assassination attempts were Cade's work, Kaelin said. The council has a complete evidentiary record of this, including the specific evidence that was discovered and documented by Mara Thorne, who could have chosen to allow the investigation to remain incomplete and use the uncertainty to her advantage. She did not. She found the evidence, brought it forward, and then risked her life to save mine when Cade made his final move. He paused. What precisely is the theory of how this serves the agenda of a woman seeking to harm me? Crane opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. The optics, he said finally, which was the admission of a man who has discovered that his case rests on less solid ground than he believed when he built it. I don't govern by optics, Kaelin said. I govern by evidence and judgment and the commitment to get both as close to correct as I can manage. The evidence here is complete and it points in one direction. He looked across the hall, not at Crane, not at any single face, but at the full assembled body of it, the lords and representatives and council members who had come to this hall with their predetermined conclusions. Mara Thorne is the royal healer of Ashvale Fortress. She holds that position by her own extraordinary competence and by the trust of this household, which she has earned specifically and demonstrably over the course of 46 days that included a conspiracy, 2 assassination attempts, and the most comprehensive crisis this fortress has faced in 20 years. If any lord here has a specific evidenced objection to that appointment, I will hear it. The hall was silent. If what is being objected to, he said, and his voice was quieter now, but had not lost any of its weight, is the fact that she is someone I value, then I will tell you plainly that I have considered the matter carefully, and I have determined that valuing a person of that quality is the most strategically sound decision I have made in 12 years of leading this pack, and I will not be argued out of it. Crane looked at his hands. He looked at the 2 lords on his immediate left, the closest members of his alliance who had attended in person. He looked at the council. He looked at Mara. She met his gaze with the steadiness she brought to rooms where things were being decided, and the outcome was not yet clear, but the direction was. She did not perform confidence. She simply held the gaze of a man who had built his case on the thesis that she was a liability and waited for him to complete the accounting of what the evidence actually showed. Crane looked away first. The formal vote of the convening was 7-4 in favor of affirming the council's existing authority and the Alpha's appointment structure, with the understanding that the Eastern Territories would be invited to send a permanent council representative as a mechanism for ongoing engagement. It was a political compromise, Haas's design, clean and practical, and it produced the outcome that mattered while giving the Eastern Alliance a face-saving foothold in the structure going forward. It was not perfect. Mara had learned over the years to be skeptical of perfect. Perfect was usually a fiction constructed over a complicated substrate that would eventually become visible. Good enough, built on honest material, lasted. The hall dispersed in the particular way of halls after contentious proceedings, quickly, with the energy of people who needed to process what had happened in smaller and more private configurations. Crane left without speaking to her. 2 of his allied lords, passing her chair, nodded. She nodded back. It was the smallest possible acknowledgement, and it was sufficient. Haas stopped beside her. He looked down at her with the expression she had come to read as his version of warmth. Practical, unsentimental, completely genuine. Supply room protocols are working well, he said. They are, she agreed. Sorel says the new compound rotation has reduced waste by 30%. He mentioned, good work, Haas said. 2 words, from a man who did not distribute them carelessly. He moved on. She sat in the emptying hall and let the quiet settle around her. The fire in the great hearth crackled and the snow pressed the windows, and the mountain stood outside in its enormous patient dark. And she thought about a cottage on the edge of the world and the smell of herb bundles drying over a hearth and the long, quiet years of being small and invisible and safe. She had not been wrong to make that life. It had been the right life for the time that required it, built from the materials available, serving the purpose it needed to serve. She did not regret it, but she was not going back to it. She found Lena in the kitchen with Bet, both of them engaged in the serious project of making something with winter roots and dried mushrooms, Lena narrating the process in the running murmur that indicated full absorption. Bet looked up when Mara entered, and the old woman's face, lined and dry, and possessed of the particular quality of a person who had been watching the world from its edges long enough to have very accurate opinions about it, said something without using any words at all. "How did it go?" Lena asked, not looking up from the mushrooms. "Well," Mara said. "Good," Lena said, in the tone of someone who had expected this outcome. "Betty said it would." "Did she?" "I said the mountain always knows," Bet said comfortably from her stool, "and the mountain picked your mother." Lena nodded, accepting this cosmological accounting without question. Mara sat at the kitchen table and watched her daughter cook and felt the specific quality of a life that had, without her fully charting the moment of transition, become something different from survival. Not the absence of danger. There would be more of that. She was clear-eyed about it. There was always more. Not the absence of complication. Her life was structurally complicated and would remain so, in ways she was still discovering. But something that lived underneath the complication and the danger, something that did not require the absence of those things to be real. Something that felt, for the first time in 4 years, like foundation rather than foothold. Kaylin found her at the preparation room that evening. She was not working. That was notable, Osmeet. She was almost always working in the preparation room, the work being its own specific comfort, the ordered sequence of measurement and combination and assessment providing the reliable satisfaction of things done correctly in a world that offered no such guarantee about most things. But tonight she was simply sitting at the bench, the tools put away, the compounds properly stored, the room in the clean order she kept it. She was looking at the scar on her shoulder, old and silver faded, the crescent shape of it visible in the lamp's light. She had been looking at it the way she had never allowed herself to look at it before, directly, without the instinct to look away. Just the scar. Just what it was. The record of a night that had been many things simultaneously, had cost much and also, in the deepest and most irreducible sense, given something back. He knocked. She had noted over the weeks that he always knocked on her preparation room, not the infirmary, where knocking would have been impractical and medical professionalism governed the terms of entry. The preparation room was hers specifically, and he treated it accordingly. "Come in," she said. He entered and took the chair across the bench, the same one he had used in the first days, the chair that had become, in the small accumulated way of repeated small things, his chair in this room. He looked at her. He looked at where she was looking. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Not in years," she said. "It's just a scar." "Not just," he said. "No," she agreed. "Not just." She turned to face him fully. He was watching her with the dark water of his eyes, and the patience that had been consistent since the beginning. The patience of a man who had made a commitment to pace and was keeping it, who had been exactly what he said he would be for 46 days of ordinary and extraordinary both. "The convening is done," she said. "It is. Crane is not satisfied." "No, but he's managed. There's a difference." He held her gaze. "Mara, what do you need?" It was, she thought, the right question. Not "what do you want," which invited a kind of performance, a reaching for things beyond the immediate. Not "what's next," which asked her to live in the future before the present was finished. "What do you need?" The healer's question, the question of a person who had learned to ask it from watching her ask it to other people. She looked at him across the preparation room bench with its ordered tools and its correct compounds and its single lamp throwing clean, warm light across the space she had made her own in this fortress. "This," she said, "exactly what this is right now. I need this to be what it is, and I need to be allowed to let it be that without," she found the words carefully, "without it needing to be something larger than it is tonight." "Then it's what it is tonight," he said, simply. "Nothing larger." "Tomorrow it can be more," she said. "Tonight it's this." "Tonight it's this," he agreed. They sat across from each other in the lamplight and the quiet of the preparation room, the tools put away, the work done for the day, the snow pressing softly against the window. Outside, the fortress was settling into its winter night. the watch rotation in its rhythm, the fires banked. Lena asleep in the room down the hall with Captain and her small commander face relaxed into something younger, Sorrel's protocols running correctly, the supply room locked and properly signed. Everything in its right place. She had spent 4 years learning to make small things strong enough to hold the weight of a life. She understood, more than most, that this was how permanent things were built. Not through grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, but through the patient, ordinary work of showing up, day after day, in the cold and the uncertainty, and choosing the same thing again. She was going to keep choosing it. She could feel that clearly, the way she felt compound interactions clearly. The certainty that was not certainty about outcomes, but certainty about direction, about which way she was facing and what she was walking toward. Lena said, "You've been making the tea wrong," she said. "She told me," he said, "this morning, in considerable detail. She'll show you the right way. She's already scheduled it for tomorrow after breakfast." Mara looked at him. "She also told me she's going to teach you the second stack stone variation, the one with the corner pieces." I wasn't aware there was a second variation. "There are 4, Mara said. "She invented 3 of them." Something in his face, the almost smile, present and unhidden and warm in the lamplight. "Of course she did." "She has opinions about everything," Mara said. "She's going to have opinions about every single decision you make for the rest of your life, and she's going to tell you all of them with complete honesty and no diplomatic softening." "Good," he said. "You say that now." "I mean it now," he said. "And I'll mean it when it's inconvenient." She looked at him for one more long moment. At the dark water of his eyes, the scar above his collar, the specific quality of a person who had been telling her the truth for 46 days and intended, she believed, to keep doing it. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Just okay." The smallest word for something that was not small at all, the word that meant, "I believe this, I'm here, I'm staying, I'm done running in the direction that was always the wrong direction." The word that meant the foundation was real and the foothold was gone, and she had decided, clearly, without reservation, with her eyes open, to let that be true. He heard it. She watched him hear it, watched the full weight of it land and settle in his face. He did not say anything else. Neither did she. They sat in the lamplight while the snow fell on the mountain's terms, and the fortress breathed around them, and somewhere down the hall Lena slept with her rabbit and her opinions and her dark eyes that saw everything, and the scar on Mara's shoulder was warm, and the night was long and quiet, and entirely, completely theirs. Spring came late to the Asheville Mountains. It always did, grudgingly, incrementally, the cold releasing its claim on things 1 degree at a time, as though unconvinced that the season change was worth the concession. But it came. It always came. The snow pulled back from the lower paths first, then from the courtyard stones, then from the window ledges, until one morning the air had a different quality. Not warm, not yet, but the specific quality of air that has decided it is no longer winter, even if winter has not quite agreed. Lena was the first to notice. She was always the first to notice things. She was in the courtyard with the herb pots on that morning, crouched over the winter moss that had survived under its cloth covering and was now pushing small green intentions up through the dark soil. She had Captain under one arm and her hands deep in the dirt, and she was talking to the plant in the quiet murmur she used when she was cataloging the world. "You can come out now," she told the winter moss. "It's safe." Mara stood in the courtyard doorway and watched her daughter's small, certain hands in the dirt, and the new green pushing up through the dark and the mountain in the distance beginning to show its lower rock through the retreating snow. She heard him before she saw him, the familiar footfall on the courtyard stones, the specific weight of it. He came to stand beside her in the doorway, close enough that their shoulders touched, and looked at where she was looking. "She talks to the plants," he said. "She talks to everything," Mara said. "The plants actually respond." He looked at her, the not-quite smile. After 6 months, she had learned the full range of it, the degrees of it, what each degree meant, the specific version that appeared when Lena had said something that had rearranged some previously settled piece of how he understood the world, which happened approximately twice a week. Kalen, Lena called, without looking up from the winter moss. She had stopped calling him anything formal, approximately 1 week into his Stackstone education, and had not gone back. He had not asked her to. Come look, it's coming back. He crossed the courtyard and crouched beside her daughter in the spring mud in his good clothes without any hesitation at all, and he looked at the small green push of new growth with the complete attention of a person who has been taught by a 4.5-year-old to take small growing things seriously. It is, he said. It was cold for a long time, Lena said, but it remembered how to come back. He looked at her. Then he looked across the courtyard at Mara in the doorway. She looked back at him. The morning light was the new spring kind, thin and clear and entirely without performance, and the mountain stood behind him in the beginning of its thaw, and her daughter's hands were in the dirt next to his, and the winter moss was coming back the way it always came back, the way living things came back when the conditions finally changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but reaching steadily and with complete confidence toward the light. She stepped out of the doorway and into the courtyard. The cold of the stones came up through her boots, familiar and known. The mountain air filled her lungs with its specific clarity. The scar on her shoulder was warm. She walked across the courtyard and crouched beside her daughter in the spring mud, and the three of them looked at the small green certainty pushing up through the dark soil, and the mountain stood behind them all, patient and enormous, and full of things it had been waiting to say. And the morning held.